Hey everyone, welcome back to Midnight Truth. I know a lot of you listen to these stories to help you find peaceful sleep, so before you start, tell me where you're listening from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night, or at least, it seemed that way at first. The house sat quietly at the edge of the woods, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Mia had moved in 3 months ago, chasing solitude and a fresh start. A broken engagement, a career in shambles, and the constant noise of city life had left her craving stillness. She thought she'd found it here. But peace has a way of deceiving you. From the moment Mia moved in, there were signs, small things she brushed aside. The faint scratching in the walls at night, the way the floorboards creaked even when she was standing still, the feeling that she was never quite alone. But everyone feels that in an old house, she told herself. It's just my imagination. The first month passed uneventfully. She spent her days unpacking, exploring the nearby woods, and trying to rebuild her life. She even convinced herself she was happy. But then the house began to shift. The first warning came in the form of a note. Mia found it on a Thursday morning, taped to the bathroom mirror. The words were hurried and uneven, as if written by someone in a state of panic. Do not open the door after midnight. She stared at it, her toothbrush frozen midair. For a moment, her mind reeled with explanations. Maybe it was a prank? Or something left by the previous tenant. She peeled the note off the mirror, crumpled it in her hand, and tossed it into the trash. But that night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Mia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her rational mind told her it was nothing, but her gut said otherwise. When midnight came and went without incident, she laughed at herself for being so paranoid. That laughter didn't last. 2 days later, another note appeared. This time it was on her nightstand. She was certain it hadn't been there when she went to bed, and the realization sent a chill down her spine. She picked it up with trembling hands. You've been warned? Mia's breath caught. She checked the locks on every door and window, her heart racing. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, the unease settled in her chest like a stone. She double-checked the locks, climbed into bed, and left the lamp on as she tried to sleep. That was the first night she heard the knocking. It started faint, like someone gently tapping on the front door. Mia sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She glanced at the clock. 12:03 a.m. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. She crept out of bed and made her way to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The knocking stopped. She peered through the peephole, expecting to see a neighbor or a prankster. But the porch was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light. Mia stood there for a long moment, her breath shallow. Then, just as she turned to walk away, the knocking started again, louder this time. She jumped, her heart hammering in her chest. "Who is it?" she shouted, her voice cracking. No answer. The knocking continued for a full minute before stopping abruptly. Mia spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, clutching her phone and staring at the door. The next morning, she convinced herself it had been a dream. Or maybe a raccoon, she thought. But when she opened the door to leave for her morning walk, she found something that made her blood run cold. A small wooden box sitting on the porch. It was unmarked, with no sign of who had left it. Mia hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave it alone. But curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up and brought it inside. Inside the box was a single rusty key, tied with a red ribbon. Mia stared at it, her stomach churning. There was something about the key that felt wrong. She put the box in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But that night, the knocking came again. It was louder this time, more insistent. The clock read 12:04 a.m. Mia stayed in bed, clutching the blanket tightly around her. When the knocking stopped, she thought it was over. And then she heard it, the faint creak of floorboards in the hallway. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed her phone and tried to dial 911, but the screen was blank. No signal. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside her bedroom door. Mia held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The doorknob rattled, then turned slowly. She screamed, grabbing the lamp from her nightstand and holding it like a weapon. But when the door swung open, there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. Mia didn't sleep that night. She sat in the corner of her bedroom, clutching the lamp, her eyes fixed on the door. Morning couldn't come fast enough. She decided to leave the house. Mia packed a bag and drove to a motel on the other side of town. She didn't care about losing the security deposit or leaving behind her belongings. She just needed to get out. But the house wasn't done with her. That night, in the safety of the motel room, Mia felt a sense of calm for the first time in weeks. She turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and let out a shaky breath. At 12:03 a.m., the knocking started again. Mia froze. She stared at the door, dread pooling in her stomach. Slowly, she got out of bed and approached it, her hands trembling. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. She reached for the doorknob, every nerve in her body screaming at her to stop. But something compelled her to turn it. The door swung open and there he was. The figure standing in the hallway was barely human. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched too tightly over his bones. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his mouth was twisted into an unnatural grin. "Why didn't you listen?" he whispered. Mia tried to scream, but no sound came out. The man reached for her, his cold, bony fingers wrapping around her wrist. And then, she woke up. She was back in her bed at the rental house, drenched in sweat. The clock read 7 a.m. For a moment, she thought it had all been a nightmare. But when she went to the kitchen, the wooden box was there, the rusty key still inside. Mia's world spiraled. The notes kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. The knocking never stopped. And every time she opened the door, he was there waiting. She started keeping a journal, trying to make sense of the madness. The entries became more erratic, filled with desperate questions and fragmented thoughts. Who was he? Why was this happening? What did the key open? One night, Mia couldn't take it anymore. The knocking was deafening, shaking the walls. She grabbed the key and stormed to the front door. "Is this what you want?" she screamed, holding the key in the air. The knocking stopped. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. Mia stood there, her breath coming in short gasps. Then a voice spoke from behind her. "It's not the key. It's you." She turned slowly, her heart pounding, and came face to face with the man. Mia's scream echoed through the house, raw and instinctive, but the man didn't flinch. He stood there, impossibly close, his sunken eyes locking onto hers. His grin stretched wider, revealing teeth that looked jagged and too sharp to belong to anything human. What do you want?" Mia stammered, backing away. The man tilted his head as though confused by the question. "You let me in," he whispered. "Now you're mine." Before Mia could process his words, the lights in the house flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. Her breaths came in shallow gasps as she stumbled backward, clutching the key in her hand like it was a lifeline. "Mia," the voice was everywhere now, surrounding her, filling her head. "It's too late to run." The darkness seemed to pulse, pressing in on her from all sides. For a brief moment, she thought she saw movement, shadows shifting and writhing, closing in. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights snapped back on. The man was gone. Mia stood frozen, her back pressed against the wall. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of him. But the house was silent, eerily so. Even the usual creaks and groans were absent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Her hand tightened around the key. It felt heavier now, almost warm, as though it had absorbed the tension in the air. She glanced down at it, half expecting it to glow or move. But it was just a key, ordinary and yet completely raw. Mia didn't sleep that night. She sat in the corner of her bedroom, clutching the key and a flashlight, her eyes fixed on the door. Hours passed in agonizing silence, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. By the time the sun rose, Mia's resolve was crumbling. She couldn't stay in the house, but she also couldn't ignore the feeling that leaving wouldn't save her. The key felt like a tether, binding her to something she couldn't escape. By mid-morning, Mia decided she needed answers. She grabbed her laptop and began searching for anything that could explain what was happening. She combed through local history forums, news archives, and obscure message boards, looking for any mention of the house or its previous occupants. It didn't take long for her to find something. The house had a reputation, a dark one. It had been abandoned for years before Mia moved in, and the last known tenant had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises and seeing figures in the windows, even when the house was supposed to be empty. One article stood out. It was an old police report from 15 years ago, detailing the case of a young woman named Eliza Carter. She had lived in the house for less than a month before she vanished. Her belongings were left behind, and the front door was found wide open. The only clue was a single sentence scrawled on the wall in what investigators believed to be her blood. "Do not open the door after midnight." Mia's stomach turned. The words were the same as the note she had found. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop, her mind racing. She needed to know more. Mia decided to visit the local library, hoping to find more information about the house and its history. As she drove into town, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, every pedestrian's gaze lingered too long. The librarian, an older woman with sharp eyes and a cautious demeanor, seemed hesitant when Mia asked about the house. "Why do you want to know about that place?" she asked, her voice low. "I live there," Mia admitted. The woman's eyes widened and she leaned in closer. "You need to leave," she whispered urgently. "That house, it's not safe." Mia pressed for details, but the librarian grew increasingly nervous, glancing around as though afraid of being overheard. Finally, she pulled out a dusty file and handed it to Mia. "This is all we have," she said. "Take it and go." The file contained old newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and handwritten notes. As Mia flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. The house had a history of strange occurrences, dating back over a century. Every few decades, a tenant would disappear without a trace, always under similar circumstances. The common thread was the key, always found in a small wooden box left on the porch. One note caught Mia's attention. It was a journal entry from a woman who had lived in the house in 1957. "The knocking starts at midnight. It doesn't stop until you answer. The key, it's the only way to end it. But the cost is too high. I can't do it. I won't." Mia's pulse quickened as she read the words. What cost? What did the key unlock? She left the library with more questions than answers, the weight of the file pressing heavily on her lap as she drove back to the house. When she arrived, the first thing she noticed was the silence. It was unnatural, suffocating. The usual sounds of birds and insects were absent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Mia stepped inside cautiously, clutching the file like a shield. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy. She placed the file on the kitchen table and sat down, her eyes drawn to the wooden box still sitting on the counter. The key seemed to call to her, its presence almost magnetic. Hours passed as Mia wrestled with her thoughts. She knew she couldn't keep ignoring the knocking, but the idea of using the key terrified her. What would it unlock? And what would happen if she found out? That night, the knocking came again. It was louder than ever, shaking the walls and rattling the windows. Mia sat frozen in her chair, clutching the key in one hand and the journal entry in the other. "The cost is too high," she whispered to herself, the words echoing in her mind. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew more frantic, more desperate, as though whatever was on the other side of the door could sense her hesitation. Mia stood, her legs trembling beneath her. She walked to the door, her steps slow and deliberate. The key felt like it was burning in her hand, searing its shape into her palm. When she reached the door, she hesitated. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding. The knocking stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then a voice came from the other side of the door, low, guttural, and filled with malice. "Let me in." Mia's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around the key as she backed away from the door. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy, and she could feel the house closing in on her. She turned and ran, retreating to her bedroom and locking the door behind her. The knocking resumed, louder and more aggressive than before, but this time it wasn't just at the front door. It was everywhere. The walls, the windows, the ceiling, all of them vibrated with the sound of fists pounding against them. Mia clamped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know how much longer she could take it. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia lowered her hands, her body trembling. She looked down at the key, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. She knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. Whatever the cost, she had to find out what the key unlocked. The house was silent now. Not the kind of silence that brought peace, but the kind that suffocated. Every creak of the floor beneath Mia's feet felt deafening. Every breath she took seemed to echo in the stillness. She stood in her bedroom, the key heavy in her hand. It was as though the house itself was waiting, anticipating her next move. She didn't sleep that night. How could she? The constant knocking, the voices, the unrelenting fear, it had stripped her of any semblance of calm. The moment she closed her eyes, she could see his face, pale, hollow, and grinning. By morning, she had made up her mind. She couldn't keep running, and she couldn't ignore the key any longer. Something told her the answers she sought were tied to it. But first she needed help. Mia grabbed her laptop and typed out an email to the only person she thought might believe her, her college friend Emma. Emma was the kind of person who thrived on the unexplained. Her life revolved around the supernatural, researching urban legends, chasing ghost stories, and analyzing folklore. If anyone could make sense of what Mia was experiencing, it was her. Her email was simple but urgent. Subject asterisk, I need your help. Please, Emma. I know we haven't talked in years, but I'm desperate. Something is happening in this house and I don't know how to stop it. There's a key and strange things are happening. Please call me as soon as you get this. I'll explain everything. Mia asterisk asterisk. After hitting send, Mia sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. She prayed Emma would respond quickly. But as the hours passed with no reply, Mia's anxiety grew. She paced the house, the key never leaving her hand. She felt as though she was being watched, even though every window was locked and the curtains were drawn. By mid-afternoon, her phone buzzed. It was Emma. Mia? Emma's voice was cautious, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. It's me, Mia said, her voice trembling. Thank you for calling. What's going on? Emma asked. Mia hesitated, unsure of where to begin. It's the house, she said finally. Weird things keep happening. Notes, noises, knocking. And there's this key. A key? Emma interrupted. What kind of key? It's old, Mia said, glancing at the object in her hand. Rusty, tied with a red ribbon. It was left on my porch in a box. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mia, Emma said slowly, I've read about something like this before. Are you near your laptop? I want you to look up a story for me. Mia rushed to her computer, her hands shaking as she opened the browser. Search for the keeper's key, Emma instructed. Mia typed the words and hit enter. The first few results were obscure blogs and forum posts, each describing eerie legends and cryptic warnings. One link caught her eye, the key that opens what should stay locked. She clicked on it, her heart pounding. The article detailed a chilling story about a key said to appear in cursed locations, always accompanied by unexplained phenomena. The key was believed to unlock something sinister, something that should never be released. The keeper, Emma explained, is what people call the entity tied to the key. The stories say it's bound to guard whatever the key unlocks. But if you use it, you release it. Release what? Mia whispered. No one knows, Emma said. But the accounts are always the same. People vanish. Houses burn down. Entire families are found dead. Whatever it is, Mia, it's dangerous. Mia's stomach churned. What am I supposed to do? Emma hesitated. Most of the stories say you can't get rid of the key. It always comes back. But there might be a way to stop the keeper. How? I don't know yet, Emma admitted. But I'll keep digging. In the meantime, do not, under any circumstances, use that key. Mia nodded, even though Emma couldn't see her. Okay, just please hurry. The call ended, leaving Mia with more questions than answers. That night, she prepared for the worst. She barricaded the doors with furniture, placed salt along the windowsills, and lit every candle she could find. The key sat on the kitchen table, taunting her with its quiet presence. At 11:55 p.m., the knocking started. It was softer this time, almost polite, but it sent a chill down Mia's spine. She sat frozen in the living room, her eyes fixed on the front door. Let me in, the voice called. It was the same voice she had heard before, low and guttural, dripping with malice. Mia clutched her phone, her fingers trembling as she typed out a message to Emma. It's happening again. I don't think I can stop it asterisk asterisk. But before she could hit send, the phone screen went dark. Let me in, the voice repeated, louder this time. Mia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, she screamed. The knocking stopped. For a brief moment, Mia thought it was over. But then she heard it, a faint scraping sound like fingernails dragging across the walls. Her blood ran cold as the sound grew louder, moving from room to room. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the house. Mia grabbed the key from the table, her hands shaking. She didn't know why she picked it up, maybe as a weapon or maybe because some part of her believed it could protect her. The scraping stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. And then the lights went out. Mia's breath came in shallow gasps as she fumbled for the flashlight she had left on the couch. She turned it on, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness. Mia, the voice was right behind her. She spun around, the flashlight shaking in her hand. The beam landed on him, the keeper. He stood in the doorway, his hollow eyes gleaming in the darkness, his grin impossibly wide. You can't run, he whispered. Mia stumbled backward, her foot catching on the edge of the coffee table. She fell hard, the flashlight slipping from her grasp. It rolled across the floor, its beam flickering as it came to rest against the far wall. The keeper stepped closer, his movements unnaturally slow as though savoring her fear. Mia's hand brushed against the key and she gripped it tightly. "What do you want from me?" she screamed. "You," he said simply. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. Mia's vision blurred as the air grew heavy, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She felt the key grow warm in her hand, almost burning her skin. And then, without thinking, she spoke. "What does the key open?" The keeper stopped, his grin faltering for the first time. His hollow eyes seemed to bore into her, searching for something. "You don't want to know," he said finally. But Mia's fear was overtaken by a surge of defiance. She rose to her feet, clutching the key like a talisman. "Tell me," she demanded. The keeper's grin returned, wider than ever. "Very well," he said. "Use it and you'll see." The word sent a shiver down Mia's spine, but she didn't back down. If the key was the answer, she had to know. She turned and ran, the keeper's laughter echoing behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the basement door, the only place in the house she hadn't dared to go. The key seemed to vibrate in her hand as she inserted it into the lock. The air around her grew colder, and the faint sound of whispers filled her ears. With a deep breath, Mia turned the key. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. What lay beyond was darkness, thick, impenetrable, and alive. It seemed to pulse, writhing like a living thing. Mia stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind her. And that's when she realized the truth. The basement was not what Mia had expected. She thought she'd find stairs leading down to a cold, damp room filled with old furniture or forgotten boxes. Instead, she stood at the edge of an endless void. The air felt thick, almost liquid, and it carried a faint metallic tang like blood. The darkness ahead seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. Mia hesitated, gripping the key tightly. The whispers were louder now, surrounding her, growing in intensity. They weren't random sounds, they were voices, hundreds of them, murmuring in overlapping tones. Some begged, some screamed, and others laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down her spine. She didn't know why she stepped forward, but something pulled her deeper into the abyss. The floor beneath her feet wasn't wood or concrete, it felt like nothing at all, as though she were walking on shadows. Each step seemed to stretch time, seconds turning into minutes, minutes into hours. And then she saw it. A faint glow appeared in the distance, a sickly green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. It illuminated the edges of an ancient door, tall and ornate, carved from dark wood that seemed to ooze a black, tar-like substance. Symbols Mia couldn't comprehend were etched into its surface, writhing and shifting as if alive. The whispers grew frantic, their tones urgent and pleading. "Don't open it. You'll regret it. It's watching." Mia stopped, her breath hitching. She could feel something on the other side of the door, something vast and incomprehensible, waiting. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but her legs wouldn't move. The key in her hand pulsed, warm and alive, pulling her closer. She reached the door, her fingers trembling as she raised the key. "You don't have to do this," a voice whispered behind her. Mia froze, her heart pounding. She spun around, but the void was empty. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking. For a moment there was silence. Then a figure stepped forward, materializing from the shadows. It was Emma. Mia's mind reeled. Emma looked just as she remembered her, tall, with sharp eyes and a confident posture. But something was off. Her skin was too pale, her movements too smooth, like a puppet on invisible strings. "Emma?" Mia whispered. The figure tilted its head, smiling faintly. "Yes, it's me. I came to help." Mia took a step back. How did you get here?" Emma's smile didn't falter. "You called me, remember? I couldn't let you face this alone." But Mia's gut told her something was wrong. This wasn't Emma. The real Emma would never smile like that, so calm and serene in a place like this. "Why are you here?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To stop you," Emma said, her tone light, almost playful. "That door, it's not meant to be opened." Mia clenched her jaw, her grip tightening on the key. "What's behind it?" Emma's smile faded. "Something you can't undo." Mia's eyes darted between the door and the figure claiming to be Emma. The whispers were deafening now, overlapping in a chaotic cacophony. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. Open the door." The conflicting voices clawed at Mia's mind, tearing her thoughts apart. "Who are you?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. The figure's expression shifted, the faint smile twisting into something darker. "I told you, Mia. I'm your friend. I'm here to protect you." But the way she said it sent a chill down Mia's spine. Prove it, Mia said. The figure paused, its head tilting unnaturally. What do you mean? What did I call you in college? Mia asked. For the first time, the figure faltered. Its smile wavered and its eyes narrowed. Mia, it began, but its voice was different now, deeper, more guttural. Mia's chest tightened. She stepped back, holding the key like a weapon. You're not her. The figure's form began to distort, its limbs stretching unnaturally, its skin darkening and cracking like old wood. The thing that had pretended to be Emma let out a guttural laugh, its voice echoing in the void. I tried to warn you, it growled. But you didn't listen. Before Mia could react, the creature lunged at her. She screamed, stumbling backward and slamming into the door. The key in her hand flared with heat, and the symbols on the door glowed brighter. The creature stopped abruptly, recoiling as though burned. Mia's chest heaved as she looked at the key, its surface now glowing faintly. It wasn't just a key, it was a weapon. The creature snarled, its form flickering like a broken image. You think you can stop this? It hissed. You have no idea what you've done. With a guttural roar, the creature dissolved into the shadows, leaving Mia alone once more. Her hands shook as she turned back to the door. The whispers were still there, but now they sounded almost eager. Mia raised the key, the glow intensifying as she slid it into the lock. The door pulsed, the symbols writhing and shifting as though alive. With a deep breath, Mia turned the key. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a slow, agonizing creak. What lay beyond was indescribable. It wasn't a room, it wasn't even a place. It was an expanse of swirling darkness, broken only by faint, flickering lights that seemed to float in the void like dying stars. And in the center of it all was it. A shape too vast to comprehend, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. It had no face, no eyes, but Mia could feel it watching her. Its presence was suffocating, a weight pressing down on her chest and filling her mind with a crushing sense of insignificance. You called me, the entity said, its voice resonating in her very bones. Now you must decide. Mia's knees buckled and she fell to the ground. Decide what? She whispered, tears streaming down her face. Release me, the entity said, or take my place. The words hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean? You open the door, it said. Now one must stay to keep it closed. The realization struck her like lightning. The keeper wasn't the entity behind the door, it was the one guarding it. And now she was being asked to take its place. Her mind raced. If she refused, the entity would be free to unleash whatever horrors it held onto the world. But if she agreed, she looked at the key, its glow dimming in her hand. It had been a trap all along, bait to lure her into this impossible choice. What happens if I don't? She asked, her voice trembling. The entity didn't answer. Instead, it began to move closer, its massive form blotting out the flickering lights. Mia's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of the decision crushing her. But before she could make a choice, the void began to collapse. The door slammed shut behind her, the symbols flaring brightly before fading into darkness. The whispers stopped and the air grew still. Mia found herself back in the basement, the key lying cold and inert in her hand. For a moment, she thought it was over. But then she heard the knocking again, this time louder than ever. And she knew the choice wasn't hers anymore. The knocking came faster this time, harder, and with an urgency that rattled the walls. It wasn't coming from the front door anymore. It was everywhere, the windows, the walls, the floors. It surrounded Mia like a swarm of angry fists demanding to be let in. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she backed away from the basement door. The key was cold now, lifeless in her hand, but its weight was unbearable. She had opened something that couldn't be undone. The knocking stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then a voice. I warned you, Mia. It wasn't the keeper. This voice was colder, more human, and infinitely crueler. It was coming from upstairs. Her blood ran cold as she realized what that meant. Someone, or something, was inside the house. Mia's first instinct was to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But her legs felt like lead, her body rooted to the spot. She stared up the dark staircase, clutching the key like a lifeline. Come upstairs, the voice called, light and mocking. I just want to talk. Mia shook her head, her throat dry. She didn't trust her voice enough to respond. When the voice came again, it was closer. Don't keep me waiting. Her legs moved before her brain could catch up. She stumbled toward the front door, her fingers fumbling with the locks. But no matter how hard she turned the deadbolt or yanked on the handle, the door wouldn't budge. Mia, the voice cooed closer still. She spun around, her back against the door. The staircase loomed before her, dark and yawning, like the mouth of a predator. She could hear slow, deliberate footsteps descending from the upper floor. The key in her hand began to vibrate, faintly at first, then stronger. She looked down, her breath hitching. It wasn't just vibrating, it was glowing again, faintly pulsing with an unnatural light. Something about the glow emboldened her. She straightened, forcing herself to take a step forward. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling but audible. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then the voice laughed. It was a low, rasping sound that made her stomach churn. "You really don't remember, do you?" Mia's brow furrowed. "Remember what?" The figure stepped into view at the top of the staircase, and Mia's heart nearly stopped. It was her. No, almost her. The figure had her face, her build, even her clothes. But the features were wrong. The eyes were too bright, the smile too wide, and the skin too smooth, as if the thing had been made from a memory, pieced together with just enough detail to unsettle her. "You left me," the figure said, its tone light but accusing. "You thought you could just walk away." Mia shook her head, her mind racing. "I don't know what you're talking about." The thing tilted its head, mimicking her own nervous tick. "Don't lie to me. You've been running from this for years." Mia's chest tightened. She didn't know what it was talking about, but the words struck something deep inside her, a memory she couldn't fully grasp. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice faltering. The smile widened, impossibly so, splitting the figure's face in two. "Oh, but you do." Before Mia could respond, the figure moved. It didn't walk, it glided, closing the distance between them in an instant. Mia stumbled back, her hand shooting up to shield herself, but the thing stopped inches from her face, its two bright eyes locking onto hers. "You took the key," it hissed. "You opened the door. And now you have to pay the price." Mia's mind raced. "What do you want from me?" The thing leaned closer, its voice a whisper. "You already know." The key in her hand grew hotter, its glow intensifying. Without thinking, Mia raised it, holding it between herself and the creature. The light flared, and the thing recoiled with a guttural snarl. "Your tricks won't save you," it spat, its form flickering like a broken image. Mia didn't wait to find out if it was right. She turned and ran, bolting up the staircase and into the first room she could find. It was the bathroom, a small, claustrophobic space with a single window. She locked the door behind her, her hands trembling as she leaned against it. The knocking started again, this time at the bathroom door. "You can't hide forever," the voice taunted, now deeper and more distorted. "You belong to me." Mia's eyes darted to the window. It was small, but she might be able to squeeze through. The knocking grew louder, shaking the door on its hinges. With a surge of adrenaline, Mia climbed onto the sink, prying at the window latch. It was stiff, rusted from years of neglect, but she pushed with all her strength. The door cracked behind her. "Mia," the voice growled, more monstrous now. The latch gave way and the window creaked open. Without thinking, she hoisted herself up, squeezing through the narrow frame. She fell hard onto the ground outside, her knees scraping against the gravel. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she didn't stop. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the key as she ran toward the street. The house loomed behind her, dark and silent once more. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the neighborhood, where the streetlights flickered weakly against the darkness. Mia collapsed onto a bench, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the night. The thing in the house wasn't just a ghost or a demon, it was her, or some twisted version of her. And it wasn't done with her. The key in her hand pulsed again, faintly. She stared at it, her fear mingled with anger. Whatever this thing was, it had chosen her. It had dragged her into its game. But Mia wasn't going to let it win. She pulled out her phone, praying it would work this time. To her relief, the screen lit up. She dialed Emma's number, her hands shaking. Emma picked up on the second ring. "Mia? What's going on?" "It's the key," Mia said, her voice trembling. "It's doing something to me. I don't know how to stop it." Emma was silent for a moment. "Where are you?" "I ran out of the house," Mia said. "I'm at the edge of the neighborhood, but it's not safe. I think it's following me." Emma's tone grew serious. "Listen to me carefully. There's a place, an old church on the outskirts of town. I've read about it before. It's supposed to be A barrier of sorts. If you can get there, the key might lose its hold on you. Mia clung to the hope in Emma's voice. How do I find it? Emma gave her directions, her voice urgent. But Mia, be careful. If the key senses what you're trying to do, it might fight back. Mia swallowed hard. I'll get there. As she hung up, she felt the weight of the key in her hand. The whispers were faint now, but they hadn't stopped. She knew the thing in the house wasn't far behind. With a deep breath, she started running again, the darkness closing in around her. The streets felt abandoned, as though the entire town had folded in on itself. Shadows stretched unnaturally under the flickering streetlights, and Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they were alive, reaching for her as she ran. The key in her hand grew heavier with every step, as if it were fighting her. Emma's instructions echoed in her mind. An old church on the outskirts of town, a barrier, she'd said. A place that might keep whatever was after her at bay. But Mia couldn't help but wonder. If the church was truly a sanctuary, why had Emma never mentioned it before? The whispers had returned, faint but persistent. They no longer surrounded her. They were inside her head. Turn back, they hissed. You can't escape. It's already too late. Mia gritted her teeth, gripping the key tighter. She refused to listen. Her feet pounded against the cracked pavement, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The houses around her were dark, their windows like empty eyes staring down at her. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the twisted figure from the house following her. The street behind her was empty, but she could feel it. Something was there watching, waiting. The road began to narrow as the town faded behind her. The houses gave way to dense woods, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The path ahead was unlit, swallowed by darkness, but Mia didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The key pulsed in her hand, a faint warmth that made her stomach churn. She looked down at it, and for a moment she thought she saw something moving within the metal. A flicker of light, like an eye opening and closing. The whispers grew louder. Mia? This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was her name, spoken in a voice that sent chills racing down her spine. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Mia, the voice called again, closer now. She spun around, searching the darkness. Who's there? No answer. The silence pressed down on her like a weight. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. And then she saw it. At the edge of the trees, something was moving. No, crawling, a shape that was wrong in every way, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. It dragged itself forward, its movements jerky and stilted, like a broken marionette. Mia's breath caught in her throat. The figure wasn't just crawling, it was reaching for her, its long, spindly fingers clawing at the ground. Run. The words screamed in her mind, and her body obeyed. She turned and bolted, the key pulsing hotter now, almost burning her palm. The thing behind her let out a guttural sound, a mix of a growl and a laugh, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. The trees closed in around her, their branches snagging at her clothes and hair. The whispers were deafening now, overlapping and chaotic. Don't go. Stay with us. You can't leave. Mia stumbled, nearly falling as the path twisted beneath her. She could feel the thing gaining on her, its presence like a shadow growing darker and colder. And then she saw it. The church. It rose out of the darkness like a beacon, its crumbling stone walls bathed in the faint glow of moonlight. The windows were shattered, and the steeple leaned precariously to one side, but it was there, a promise of safety. Mia pushed herself harder, her lungs burning as she sprinted toward the entrance. The thing behind her let out a scream, a high-pitched, inhuman wail that seemed to pierce her very soul. She reached the church steps, her hands fumbling for the door handle. It was rusted and stiff, but she yanked on it with all her strength. The door creaked open just as the thing lunged at her. She threw herself inside, slamming the door shut behind her. The silence was immediate. Mia collapsed against the door, her chest heaving. The whispers were gone, and for the first time in what felt like hours, she could breathe. The church was dark and cold, its air heavy with dust and decay. Broken pews littered the floor, and the altar at the far end was covered in cobwebs. But despite its state of disrepair, the place felt still. She looked down at the key in her hand. Its glow had faded, and it no longer pulsed. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe Emma had been right. Maybe this place really was a sanctuary. But then she heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the door behind her. Her heart leapt into her throat as she scrambled to her feet, backing away from the door. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. "Mia," the voice called again, distorted and guttural. She turned, searching the dark church for somewhere to hide. Her eyes landed on a staircase leading down into the basement. She hesitated, her stomach twisting. The scratching turned into pounding, the door shaking on its hinges. With no other choice, Mia ran for the staircase. The basement was worse than she'd imagined. It wasn't just dark, it was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything. The air was damp and cold, carrying a faint, rotten smell that made her gag. Her hands fumbled along the wall until she found an old lantern. She lit it with trembling fingers, the flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The basement was empty, save for a single heavy door at the far end. Unlike the rest of the church, the door looked new, polished wood with intricate carvings that seemed to shift when she looked at them. The key in her hand began to glow again, faint but steady. She approached the door slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't want to open it. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to turn back. But the pounding upstairs grew louder, more violent. The thing was coming. Mia raised the key, her hand shaking. The carvings on the door pulsed with light, matching the rhythm of the key. As she slid the key into the lock, a voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant, different from the whispers. "Are you ready to finish this?" She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the key. "Finish what?" she whispered. There was no answer, only silence. With a deep breath, she turned the key. The lock clicked and the door swung open. What lay beyond was unlike anything she'd ever seen. The door creaked open slowly, a sound so piercing that it felt like a blade slicing through Mia's ears. She stared into the basement beyond, her breath shallow, her heart racing faster than she thought possible. The lantern in her trembling hand cast a flickering glow across the room, but the shadows seemed to absorb the light, swallowing it back into the dark. The air in the basement was colder than anything Mia had felt before. It seeped into her bones, a frigid touch that made every part of her shiver. The smell of dampness and rot filled her nostrils, a sickly, cloying odor that made her stomach churn. The walls were slick with moisture, and the floor was littered with old, broken tools and rusted metal fragments. She took a hesitant step forward, her lantern casting a wavering circle of light ahead of her. The basement was vast, with corners that disappeared into darkness. She could hear the distant sound of water dripping, a slow, rhythmic patter that added to the oppressive atmosphere. Her gaze landed on an old wooden table against one wall. On it lay a collection of objects, a tattered notebook, a rusted hammer, and a stack of yellowed photographs. She moved closer, curiosity overcoming her terror. She picked up the notebook first, its leather cover cracked and worn. Flipping through the pages, she found handwriting, faint and shaky, almost illegible. But a few words stood out, words that made her pulse quicken. "Don't trust the key. It takes but never gives back. The keeper always wins." The words blurred as her hands began to tremble. The handwriting seemed almost a warning, a desperate plea from someone who had been through what she was now experiencing. She glanced at the stack of photographs next. Picking one up, her breath caught. In the image, she saw a man standing in the dark basement she now stood in, his eyes wide with terror. The shadows around him were moving, forming shapes that looked almost human. Mia glanced back at the door. The scratching sound upstairs had stopped, but the pounding was louder now, more insistent. The thing was coming, and it was only a matter of time before it reached her. She had to move. She turned her attention back to the basement room, taking a shaky breath. Her eyes were drawn to the far end of the basement, where an old chair sat against the wall. Sitting in it was a man, pale, gaunt, his eyes hollow and sunken. He looked up at her as she approached, and a chill ran down her spine. It was the man from the photograph. His eyes met hers, a flicker of recognition passing through them. You shouldn't be here," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Mia swallowed her fear, her curiosity taking hold. "Who are you? What's going on here?" The man's gaze flicked to the key in her hand. His expression shifted to one of terror. "The key, it belongs to the keeper. He doesn't let go. He owns everything, even us." "What keeper?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't understand. What does he want?" The man's head drooped, his voice a ghostly whisper. "Freedom comes at a price. Remember who you are, Mia. Remember what you left behind." The shadows in the basement seemed to ripple, forming shapes that danced on the walls. Mia glanced back at the door, her breath quickening as the scratching noise resumed, louder and closer. The The thing was almost here. She turned back to the man, desperation in her eyes. How do I stop it? How do I get out of here? The man lifted a trembling hand, pointing to a rusty iron grate in the corner of the basement. The grate was bent and covered in grime, but it was her only hope. The way through there. But beware, the keeper sees everything. Suddenly, the shadows lunged at her, a dark mass of tendrils that reached out like claws. Mia leapt back, the lantern slipping from her grip and clattering to the floor. The light flickered and went out, plunging the basement into darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she felt the shadows brush against her skin, a cold, clammy touch that made her skin crawl. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to move. She sprinted across the basement floor toward the iron grate, her hands scraping against sharp metal shards along the way. The shadows followed her, moving with an unsettling grace. She could hear the things breathing, a ragged, guttural sound that grew louder with every step she took. She reached the grate, her hands shaking as she tried to force it open. The rusted metal scraped against her palms, but she didn't stop. She pulled with all her strength, feeling the grate bend under the pressure. With a final, desperate heave, the grate gave way, a loud screech echoing through the basement. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling through the narrow opening into a small tunnel on the other side. The tunnel was dark and cramped, but it felt safer than the basement. She kept moving forward, her breaths ragged, her arms shaking with exhaustion. The sound of the shadows receding behind her gave her a glimmer of hope, but she knew the thing would not stop. It would chase her until the end of time if she let it. She had to escape. Her hands scraped against the walls of the tunnel, dirt and grime sticking to her palms. The narrow space twisted and turned, a maze of darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. But she kept moving, driven by a mix of terror and determination. She finally emerged on the other side of the tunnel, gasping for air. The night was colder than before, but the house, the keeper's house, was nowhere in sight. The town was distant, a dark blur on the horizon. She collapsed onto the damp ground, the key still clutched in her hand. Her breath trembled as she tried to gather her thoughts. The keeper was a force she didn't understand, but his reach was clear now. He was not just a nightmare. He was a reality that she had to face. She had survived the basement, but that was only the beginning. Whatever came next would test her strength, her will, and everything she thought she knew about herself. Mia looked at the key, its glow dim but unyielding. She made a promise to herself, a vow that solidified in her chest through the fear and confusion. She would stop the keeper. She would fight back. No matter the cost, she would find a way to escape this darkness and reclaim her life. Her eyes flicked to the horizon. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, but Mia knew one thing. She would not stop until she was free. Mia's breath slowed as she sat there on the damp ground, her back pressed against the cold tunnel wall. The key still felt like a lifeline in her trembling hand, a tenuous connection to something, anything, that could help her find a way out. The night around her was filled with unsettling noises, distant howls, rustling leaves, and faint footsteps that seemed to follow her every move. She glanced back in the direction of the basement, but the shadows and dark presence of the keeper's house were no longer visible. Still, every nerve in her body told her that the thing was still out there, lurking just beyond the edges of reality. Her legs ached, her clothes were torn from her escape through the basement and tunnel, but she stood up with a shaky determination that began to settle into resolve. She couldn't stop. She had to keep moving. But where would she go? The town was still miles away, and the surrounding area was only a blur of dark trees and twisted branches. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of shelter or a path that would lead her somewhere safe. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She remembered Emma's words about the old church being a barrier against the keeper, but now she wasn't so sure. The basement encounter had left scars on her mind, a disturbing realization that perhaps the keeper's influence was not something that could be outsmarted or outrun. Mia's hands still shook, but she clenched her fists. She needed information. She needed a strategy. She glanced at the key once more, studying its worn surface. The carvings on it seemed almost more significant now than they had before. Each line and curve felt like a clue. Emma hadn't just given her a random key, it had a purpose. She needed to understand what it meant. She took a deep breath and began walking, each step feeling like a battle against her own exhaustion. Her body was weak, but her will was stubborn. She would not let herself falter. The shadows that followed her seemed to lose interest as she moved farther from the keeper's house, but that didn't bring much comfort. She knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Suddenly, a noise to her left made her stop. A rustling sound, quick and quiet, like the footsteps of someone sneaking through the woods. Mia turned her head sharply, every muscle in her body tensing. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling but not breaking. The rustling stopped. A pair of eyes glinted briefly in the darkness before disappearing into the trees. Mia felt her heart stop for a brief moment. Was it another creature working for the keeper? Or was it someone who could help her? She decided not to wait. She took off in the opposite direction, her feet stumbling over rocks and twigs. Every few minutes she glanced back, but the eyes were no longer there. The woods around her were filled with shadows that seemed to twist and shift whenever she wasn't looking directly at them. She stumbled onto a dirt road after what felt like an hour, her breath shallow, sweat dripping down her face. In the distance, a faint light flickered. A small cabin. The dim glow of an oil lamp inside. A chance for shelter, a possible ally, she hoped. As she approached the cabin, her eyes were drawn to the wooden sign hanging crookedly on the porch. The words were faded but still readable. "Old Man Harris?" She felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this was a chance to get some answers. She climbed the rickety steps of the porch, each one creaking ominously under her weight. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. After a long pause, the door creaked open and an elderly man appeared. He was thin and frail, with a shock of white hair and deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though a surprising clarity that made Mia pause. "What do you want, girl?" the old man rasped, his voice gravelly. "It's late. You shouldn't be out here." "I'm Mia," she stammered. I need help. Something is after me, something dark. Something I can't explain." "The keeper. Do you know about the keeper?" Old Man Harris's eyes flickered with a fleeting, painful recognition. He glanced over his shoulder at the dark woods beyond his cabin before leaning in closer. "Come inside," he said in a hushed voice. "You don't want to be standing out here with it lurking around." She stepped inside the cabin, the warm light of the lamp casting a golden glow on the walls filled with trinkets and worn books. The scent of herbs and old wood filled the air. The cabin felt warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold she had just fled. She sat down on a wooden chair across from the old man, the lantern's flickering light casting shadows across his wrinkled face. "The keeper," he began, his eyes darkening. "He's not just a force of darkness. He's a force that has been here for generations. A curse that binds souls, turning them into shadows." Mia's breath caught in her throat. "But why? Why is he after me? What does he want?" Old Man Harris shook his head slowly. "The keeper doesn't just want control. He wants to own everything, every light, every shadow, every soul. But you have the key. The key has been passed down through generations. It means you're connected. Connected to something the keeper wants more than anything." She clutched the key tighter. "So, what am I supposed to do? How do I stop him?" The old man sighed deeply, his frail shoulders shaking slightly. "You need to find the heart of the keeper's power. The place where his roots are strongest. That's where you'll find the answers, where you'll have to fight." She glanced at him, determination rising despite her fear. "Then let's find it. Together." Old Man Harris nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a new intensity. "It won't be easy, but we stand a chance if we fight together." She felt the old man's words settle into her resolve. She knew that the battle was far from over, but for the first time she felt like she wasn't alone. The key wasn't just an object. It was a symbol, a connection to something greater, something she now had to protect. Mia knew she couldn't stop now. With Old Man Harris by her side, she felt a flicker of hope. The darkness was still out there, but maybe, just maybe, they could fight it back. Together, they would face the keeper, reclaim their town, and fight back against a force that seemed unbeatable. She stood up, her body stronger, her heart steady. The journey was far from over, but with this old man's knowledge and her own newfound determination, she had a fighting chance. The cold wind outside howled through the cracks in Old Man Harris's cabin, a haunting sound that seemed to carry the keeper's chilling breath. Mia sat on the worn wooden chair, the key still clutched tightly in her trembling hand. The dim lamp light cast flickering shadows on the walls, the room feeling both a refuge and a prison. Every creak of the cabin's old structure felt like a warning, a harbinger of danger that refused to be ignored. Old Man Harris moved around the room, gathering supplies. A bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth, rusted tools, and books filled with tattered pages. His bony hands moved with surprising speed, a sharp contrast to his frail appearance. Mia watched him, a mix of curiosity and fear swirling in her chest. "Old Man Harris," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "We need a plan. I can't just run forever. The keeper, he won't stop. Old Man Harris glanced at her, his eyes tired but resolute. You're right, girl. The keeper won't stop until he owns everything. But we've got a chance. If we fight smart, we might stand a chance. The key isn't just a tool, it's a beacon. It connects us to the keeper, but it also connects us to something else, something powerful. We need to find that connection and use it against him. Mia nodded, her heart racing with adrenaline. Every word he spoke felt like a lifeline, something to cling to amidst the overwhelming darkness that loomed around them. What do we need to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear that still gnawed at her. Old Man Harris sat down across from her, his eyes piercing into hers. We need to go to the old church. The church at the edge of town. It used to be a place where people came together, a place of hope. But now, it's a place where the keeper's power is strongest. She swallowed hard. The image of the basement flashed in her mind, the shadows that tried to consume her, the man with sunken eyes warning her of the keeper. The idea of confronting that darkness made her stomach churn, but she knew she had no choice. I know where the church is, Mia said, her voice gaining strength. But if the keeper is as strong as you say, how do we even get past him? Old Man Harris shook his head slowly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. We need allies. People who still remember the fight, people who haven't given in to the keeper's darkness. The keeper tries to isolate us, to make us feel like we're alone, but we still have the townsfolk who resist. We need to find them and we need to bring them together. We need to remind them that we fight for something bigger than ourselves. She nodded, determination settling into her gaze. Then let's start by gathering these people. Do you know where we can find them? The old man stood up, moving with a speed that belied his age. He walked over to a dusty bookshelf and pulled out an old yellowed map of the town. His bony finger traced the streets, pointing out landmarks and hidden spots where resistance members had been known to gather. The town square, the old library, the abandoned hardware store on Main Street. These places, they hold memories, reminders of who we were before the keeper took everything. We need to go there and find those who still resist. She looked at the map, memorizing the locations he pointed out. The thought of navigating through the town, knowing the keeper's darkness could strike at any moment, sent a chill down her spine. But she pushed the fear aside. She had come too far to stop now. We'll start with the town square, she said. If we can find someone there, someone who knows where the resistance is, that's a good start. Old Man Harris nodded. Good. But we need to move quickly. The keeper's creatures are always watching. The shadows can appear anywhere, and their power is growing stronger. She stood up, her legs still wobbly but her resolve growing stronger with each passing second. The key in her hand felt heavier now, not just an object but a symbol of the fight she was about to face. Let's go, she said, her voice firm. We'll find the resistance, bring them together, and we'll stop the keeper. No matter what it takes. She felt a surge of adrenaline as she stepped outside the cabin door into the night. The wind blew colder, but she stood tall. Old Man Harris followed closely behind her, his frail form still a source of surprising strength. The night was filled with the sounds of distant howls and the rustling of branches. Every shadow seemed to shift, a flicker of darkness lurking at the edges of the world. But Mia kept moving, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, her heart pounding with purpose. The town square was only a few blocks away. As they walked through the dark streets, she could feel the eyes of the shadows on her. Every step felt like a battle against the darkness that wanted to pull her back. Her breath was steady, her thoughts sharp. She had a mission now, gather the resistance, fight back the keeper, and reclaim the town that had been swallowed by shadows. Suddenly, a noise to her right made her stop. A figure appeared from the darkness, a young woman with messy hair and eyes full of determination. She held a baseball bat, her stance ready, her breath steady. I heard voices, she said, her voice firm. Are you one of us? Mia nodded quickly. Yes, my name is Mia. We need to find the resistance. We need to stop the keeper. The woman nodded back. I'm Lucy. I know a few people who still fight. The old library's a good place to start. It's where we meet, where we strategize. She gestured down the street. Follow me. Together, Mia, Old Man Harris, and Lucy moved through the town, the streets dark and dangerous but their purpose clear. As they walked, Lucy shared stories of the resistance, of townsfolk who refused to kneel to the keeper's shadows, and of battles that had been fought in secret corners of the town. We fight because this town is ours, Lucy said. We remember what it was like before the keeper took everything. We fight for the light that used to shine here, for the people who still care. Her words resonated with Mia, reinforcing the bond between them. She knew that the fight would be far from easy, but together they stood a chance. The town square came into view, a place that used to be the heart of the town, now a ghostly reminder of what was lost. Mia felt the shadows closing in again, but with Lucy by her side and Old Man Harris's knowledge guiding them, she felt a flicker of hope. She was no longer alone. The resistance was growing, and together they would stand against the Keeper. It was a fight that would take everything Mia had, but she wouldn't stop until she reclaimed the light for her town. She tightened her grip on the key, a promise to herself and those she would fight alongside. She would stop the Keeper. Not just for herself, but for everyone who still believed in light, in hope, and in the power of resistance. "Let's go," she said, a new resolve settling in her voice. "We fight together. Let's bring back the light." She moved forward into the shadows of the town square, knowing that the Keeper would try to stop them at every turn. But Mia was ready. With the resistance by her side, the key in her hand, and a determination that refused to waver, she would fight until every shadow was pushed back into the darkness from which it came. The night was a heavy blanket of darkness that clung to the town like a suffocating shroud. The shadows seemed thicker now, more aggressive, their presence an almost tangible threat. The wind continued its relentless howl through the streets, a sound that Mia had come to associate with danger. But alongside Lucy and Old Man Harris, she felt a sense of purpose that gave her the will to keep moving forward. The town square stretched out before them, a desolate place where laughter had once filled the air, where people had gathered to celebrate victories, mourn losses, and stand together as a community. Now it was a place of grim memories and lurking threats. The square was lit by a flickering street lamp, its dim glow barely pushing back the darkness. In the center stood an old, rusted fountain, a symbol of the town's faded glory. They approached cautiously, their breaths shallow but steady. The sound of footsteps echoed somewhere nearby. Mia glanced to the left, her heart quickening. A pair of eyes glinting in the darkness met her gaze before disappearing into the shadows. "Stay close," Lucy whispered, her voice low but resolute. "The Keeper's shadows are smarter than we think. They can ambush us any second." Mia nodded, her eyes never leaving the shadows that seemed to move and twist on their own. She felt the oppressive weight of fear in her chest but pushed it aside. She had come too far to let fear dictate her actions. Suddenly, a muffled voice reached them from the far end of the square. A man appeared from the shadows. He was tall and gaunt, with scraggly hair and sunken eyes that looked like they had seen too much. His clothes were worn and torn, but there was a flicker of defiance in his gaze. "I heard you're looking for the resistance," he said, his voice a raspy whisper that carried across the square. "Name's Frank. I've been fighting this fight since before most of you were born." Mia stepped forward. "We need to find the others. The resistance. The ones who fight back against the Keeper. We need to stop him once and for all." Frank nodded slowly. "We've been gathering people. Small groups. But the Keeper's shadows have been growing stronger. They've been taking people one by one, turning them into more shadows, stripping away everything we've fought for. The town square, the library, Main Street, everything's a battleground now." She glanced at Old Man Harris, who stood silently, his eyes locked onto Frank's. "We need a strategy," Old Man Harris said, his voice steady despite the grim situation. "We can't fight the Keeper head-on. We need to gather intel, find out where his power center is. We need to strike where it hurts him the most." Frank nodded again, a glint of resolve appearing in his tired eyes. "The church. The old church at the edge of town. That's where the Keeper's roots are strongest. He's turned it into his lair, a place where his shadows gather in numbers. But we need to get inside that place, find out the truth, and dismantle his power." Mia felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of the church. The idea of facing the Keeper in his strongest bastion filled her with dread. But she couldn't let fear take control. "We need to mobilize everyone we can find," she said, her voice determined. "We'll go to the library first. If we can gather more resistance members, we'll have a better chance." Frank gestured towards Main Street. "Follow the path down to the old library. There are people there who still hold the fight in their hearts. We've hidden out there for weeks. The shadows haven't been able to infiltrate the library completely. Not yet." "Then let's go," Lucy said, gripping her baseball bat tighter. "We'll find those who still resist and bring them together. We'll fight together, not just as individuals but as a community." They moved swiftly through the town square, each step a test of courage. The shadows seemed to grow more restless as they walked, shadows that twisted unnaturally, reaching out like dark hands. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from a nearby alley. Shadows emerged from the darkness, moving with an unsettling, coordinated grace. The keeper's creatures were here. Frank shouted, "Move! Don't let them catch us." The shadows charged towards them with horrifying speed, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. Mia's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to run alongside Lucy and Old Man Harris. She sprinted down the cracked pavement of Main Street, the wind howling in her ears, her legs screaming in exhaustion. Her heart pounded like a war drum, each beat a reminder of the stakes she was fighting for. She glanced back and saw the shadows pursuing them, but Old Man Harris dropped to the ground, a small bag in his trembling hands. "Smoke bombs," he gasped, pulling out small dark pouches. "Use them. Disorient the shadows." He handed one to Mia. "Pull the string, throw it, and run. They'll lose their form for a while, but we don't have much time." She nodded, clutching the pouch tightly. As the shadows drew closer, she pulled the string on one of the smoke bombs and hurled it to the ground. A thick, black cloud erupted, swallowing the shadows in an obscuring haze. "Go!" Old Man Harris shouted, coughing from the smoke. They stumbled through the mist, their breaths ragged, but the shadows' pursuit was momentarily thwarted. Mia could feel the tension in her body beginning to ease slightly, but only for a moment. "This way," Frank said, pointing to the entrance of the library at the end of the street. The building was old, its windows boarded up, but it stood tall as a beacon of resistance. A small group of people emerged from the shadows near the library door, armed with whatever they could find, makeshift weapons, crowbars, and tools. The resistance members greeted Frank with nods and brief words, each one a testament to their commitment to fight back. Together, they formed a formidable line, their eyes gleaming with determination. "We're stronger together," Lucy said, standing tall. "Let's fight for the light we lost. Let's fight for every person who's been taken by the Keeper's shadows." Mia felt the strength of the group around her, a collective will that pushed back the darkness. This was what she had been fighting for, a community coming together, reclaiming hope. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Frank, Lucy, and Old Man Harris, ready for whatever lay ahead. The Keeper's shadows were still a formidable enemy, but now they had allies. Together, they would face the Keeper, dismantle his power, and bring back the light to their town. She clenched the key in her hand, a symbol of her resolve. "We won't stop until we take back our town," Mia said, her voice a rallying cry. She took a breath, feeling the collective strength of the resistance behind her. It was time to confront the Keeper at his lair, at the old church where his power was strongest. But with every ally, every weapon, and every ounce of courage, Mia knew that together, they could push back the darkness and restore the light. ##### Chapter 11. The night was growing colder with each passing minute. A frigid wind swept through Main Street, rustling the broken remnants of signs and discarded papers. The shadows around the old library seemed to shrink back for a moment, as if hesitant, but their menace never fully disappeared. Mia stood at the entrance of the library, the echoes of footsteps still faintly echoing in her ears. She glanced back at the resistance members who had gathered with her, Frank, Lucy, Old Man Harris, and the others. Their eyes met hers, a mix of determination and exhaustion written across their faces. She took a steady breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. Every decision felt monumental now. Every choice was a battle against the overwhelming darkness that threatened to consume everything. "We're in this together," she said aloud, a flicker of resolve settling in her gaze. "Let's move inside. We need to gather intel, find out everything we can about the Keeper and his shadows." Frank pushed open the rusted front door of the library, the sound groaning like a wounded animal. The interior was dimly lit by a few flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves of dusty books, some of them toppled over, their pages yellowed with age. A few resistance members moved silently through the space, searching for notes, maps, and anything that could aid their cause. Old Man Harris examined a table piled with scattered newspapers and notes, his sharp eyes scanning each one carefully. "This town, it was once a place where knowledge and unity thrived," he muttered. "But now, the Keeper has turned it into a place of shadows and fear." Mia walked over to a bulletin board pinned with faded photographs and handwritten notes. One picture showed a group of people standing together in front of the town square, smiling. A time when the town was whole, before the Keeper's darkness overtook everything. She felt a pang of sadness, a reminder of what had been lost. "Look at this," Frank said, beckoning Mia over. He handed her a worn notebook filled with maps, sketches, and notes. The pages were filled with details about the town, the keeper's stronghold, and the locations of various resistance members. This notebook belonged to someone who knew the keeper better than anyone, Frank explained. She was one of the first to fight back, but she disappeared months ago. Her notes, they show how the keeper's shadows are spreading, where they gather, and how their numbers are growing. Mia's heart raced as she scanned the maps. The old church at the edge of town stood out, marked with a large, ominous red X. The keeper's lair, the source of his power. She felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation settle into her chest like a stone. "We need to get to the church," she said, determination flaring in her eyes. "But we can't just walk in. We need to know everything about his defenses, the shadow creatures, and what kind of tricks he has up his sleeve." Lucy appeared at her side, her eyes sharp and focused. "We need scouts. People who've seen the shadows up close, who survived encounters with the keeper's creatures. We need to hear their stories, gather their knowledge." Suddenly, a muffled scream echoed through the town. It came from the direction of Main Street. The shadows were moving again, faster this time, their presence undeniable and deadly. "They found us," Frank said, his expression shifting from determination to concern. "We need to fight, but we need to fight smart. If we go down Main Street, we're walking into a trap." Old Man Harris handed Mia a bundle of supplies, makeshift weapons, smoke bombs, and small bags filled with herbs. "These will help. Use the smoke bombs to disorient the shadows, the weapons to defend yourself. But remember the key, it's our greatest weapon. It connects us to the town and the fight for life. Don't let it out of your sight." She nodded, gripping the key tightly. The significance of her mission was clear. Reclaim the town, dismantle the keeper's power, and bring back hope. "Let's split up," Lucy said, her voice a mix of authority and resolve. "We'll cover more ground that way. Some of us will go to find scouts, gather intel about the shadows. The rest will fortify the entrance to the church. We'll prepare traps, set up defenses. We'll hit the keeper where it hurts the most." Mia felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. She glanced around at the resistance members, each of them preparing their weapons, reinforcing barricades, and checking the maps once more. "Remember," she said, standing tall in the center of the group. "We fight for our town, for every person who's been taken by the keeper. We fight for the light, for hope. We fight together no matter what it takes." Frank nodded, his gaunt face determined. "We'll meet at the church. The keeper won't know what hit him." She felt the collective determination of the group settle into a solid force within her. With each step she took, every plan made, and every decision she faced, she felt a growing sense of responsibility. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person in town, for every lost soul, and for every flicker of hope that still remained. Together, they moved swiftly through the dark streets, the shadows pressing in but unable to break the resistance's resolve. They split up into smaller groups, each taking a different path. Mia felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders but knew she couldn't let fear or doubt take control. As she stood alone for a moment, her breath fogging up in the cold night air, she stared at the dark silhouette of the old church in the distance. The keeper's fortress. She knew it would be a fight that would take everything she had, her strength, her courage, and her belief in a better future. She tightened her grip on the key, feeling its significance in every nerve ending, every breath. She would not stop until she brought light back to her town. "I won't let you win," she whispered into the night, her voice a quiet but resolute challenge to the darkness that loomed ahead. "Not now. Not ever." Mia took her first steps towards the church, the shadows waiting in the darkness but unable to stop her resolve. She knew the keeper would do everything he could to tear her apart, but Mia wouldn't stop until the fight was over. She would stand firm, fight back, and bring light back to the town she loved. No matter what, she would stop the keeper. She would reclaim her town. And with every ally she gathered and every battle she fought, she would restore hope to a community that refused to give up. Let the keeper bring whatever darkness he had. Mia was ready. She would fight, stand, and conquer. Let me know if you're ready to continue with Chapter 12 or if you want any particular twists or story elements included. The wind howled louder as Mia continued her approach toward the old church, the centerpiece of the keeper's twisted fortress. The shadows around the town seemed to conspire against her every step. The cold night air felt like shards of ice scraping against her skin, but she pushed forward, her eyes never wavering. The town she had once called home now seemed unrecognizable. Streets were littered with debris. Rusted street lamps flickered weakly, casting dim, wavering pools of light. Every corner seemed filled with the unsettling presence of shadows that waited just out of sight. The town had become a labyrinth of fear and darkness, but Mia was resolute. She would not stop until she reclaimed it. She felt the pressure of time bearing down on her. The plan Lucy laid out was clear, but execution was where it mattered. Mia needed to gather intel, prepare traps, and fortify their position at the church entrance. Every moment wasted could mean losing more ground to the Keeper's forces. Suddenly, a muffled cry echoed through the streets, a sound that sent a cold shiver down her spine. It came from the alleyway on the left side of Main Street. She glanced over and saw a faint silhouette struggling against something she couldn't see. Her heart pounded faster. "Someone's in trouble," she muttered. She sprinted in that direction, her breaths quick and shallow. As she turned the corner, she saw a group of shadows pinning a resistance member to the ground. The man's eyes met hers for a brief moment before the shadows engulfed him completely. "No!" she shouted, a surge of anger pushing through the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She pulled out one of the smoke bombs from Old Man Harris's bundle. Her trembling hands fumbled briefly before she took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and hurled the pouch to the ground. A thick, dark cloud erupted into the alley, engulfing everything. Shadows lost their form momentarily, stumbling and disoriented. The man on the ground disappeared into the shadows as if he had been swallowed by the darkness itself. Mia stumbled backward, the smoke stinging her eyes. But she didn't stop. She sprinted back into the main street, every step fueled by determination rather than caution. She needed to find out where the Keeper's strongest defenses were, and she had no time to waste. She moved swiftly past destroyed buildings and scattered remnants of once vibrant community landmarks. A familiar memory surfaced, her own childhood days in the town square. She remembered the laughter of kids playing, the festivals, and the community events that had once brought everyone together. Those memories felt distant now, as if they belonged to another lifetime. As she reached the library's entrance, she stopped to catch her breath. Her chest heaved, but her resolve remained unbroken. She turned to the resistance members gathered around. "We need to find scouts," she said, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. "People who've survived encounters with the shadows. We need intel about the Keeper's defenses, where his creatures are gathering, what his vulnerabilities are. We need to know everything." Frank appeared from the shadows, his gaunt face more serious than she'd ever seen. "I know someone. A woman named Clara. She used to patrol the town for the resistance. She saw the Keeper's creatures firsthand and managed to escape. If anyone knows the weaknesses of the Keeper's lair, it's her." "Then let's find her," Mia said. "Lead the way." Frank nodded, taking the lead. They moved through the back streets, sticking to the shadows, avoiding patrols of the Keeper's creatures that prowled the streets like hungry wolves. The night was filled with distant growls and whispers that sent chills down Mia's spine. Each sound was a reminder of how close danger was. After a tense walk through the narrow streets, Frank stopped in front of a dilapidated warehouse. The entrance was covered in graffiti, and rust had claimed much of the structure. Frank knocked softly on the side of the building. A woman cautiously peered out through a cracked window. Her hair was unkempt, and her eyes were sharp, wary. She glanced at Mia and Frank before opening the door a little wider. "Clara," Frank said, his voice urgent. "We need your help. We're going to take back the town. We need intel about the Keeper's fortress." She nodded silently and gestured for them to come inside the dark interior of the warehouse. Inside, the warehouse was filled with maps spread across tables, photographs pinned to the walls, and makeshift tents where the remaining resistance members rested. Clara moved with quick, purposeful motions as she handed Frank a notebook filled with detailed sketches and notes. "The Keeper's lair, the old church, it's a fortress," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. "The shadows are strongest there. But it's not just brute strength. The Keeper's real weapon is the fog. It disorients, blinds, and twists reality. People who step into that fog often lose their minds, turning into shadows themselves." She paused, her eyes haunted by memories of encounters she had survived. "You'll need more than weapons. You'll need tactics. Smoke bombs, mirrors, anything reflective. The shadows hate light and clarity. They thrive in confusion, darkness, and madness." Old Man Harris, who had followed them into the warehouse, listened intently. "How do we use these tools to our advantage?" Clara's gaze met Mia's, her eyes filled with a mix of caution and hope. "Set traps. Use mirrors to reflect light. Place smoke bombs strategically to create confusion. create illusions, they hate clarity, and most importantly, stick together. The shadows attack individuals first. They pick off the weak, the isolated. Mia felt her heart quicken with purpose. Every piece of information was a step closer to victory. "We'll take these tactics and fortify the church's entrance," she said. "We'll set up barricades, traps, mirrors, and whatever else we need. The keeper won't know what hit him." Clara nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "Let's take back our town." As she handed them more supplies, smoke bombs, reflective panels, and makeshift weapons, they moved quickly, strategizing every detail. The night grew colder, but Mia's resolve only strengthened. She felt the support of every resistance member around her, a collective force that refused to surrender. As dawn began to break over the horizon, the town's silhouette emerged slowly from the darkness. Together, they moved forward, ready to confront the keeper at his fortress, the old church where shadows had taken root and darkness had become king. Mia stood at the forefront, the key to the town clutched tightly in her hand. She felt a sense of unity, courage, and the weight of responsibility settle in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person in town who had been taken, for every soul lost to the keeper's shadows, and for a community that refused to give up. "No matter what it takes," she said aloud, her voice a quiet, fierce promise, "we'll take back our town. Together." The first rays of dawn painted the horizon with streaks of pale orange and pink, casting a dim light over the town of Eldwood. The streets, once filled with laughter and life, now lay in eerie silence, broken only by the distant howling of shadows that never truly rested. The air was heavy, a suffocating blanket of uncertainty and dread. Mia felt a mix of exhaustion and determination settle into her bones as she stood with Frank, Clara, and the rest of the resistance members near the old church's entrance. They had gathered everything they needed: makeshift weapons, reflective panels, smoke bombs, ropes, and mirrors. Their preparations were meticulous, every detail accounted for. The key Mia carried was a small but powerful symbol of her commitment. She glanced at Frank, who adjusted a rusty metal barricade. His gaunt face showed resilience, but the weariness in his eyes was undeniable. "We've got everything we need," Frank said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "We set up the traps, the mirrors, and everything else. But we need to remember, it's not just about fighting the shadows, it's about survival. We need to protect each other." Mia nodded, the gravity of the situation settling into her chest like a stone. She looked up at the old church, its towering facade a symbol of the keeper's reign. The black fog that seemed to seep from the church's cracks only heightened the sense of menace that surrounded the place. The shadows were already moving around the perimeter, lurking, their dark shapes flickering like ghosts. "Clara," she said, turning to the woman who had shared her insights about the keeper's defenses. "What do you think we'll face when we confront the keeper?" Clara's eyes flicked to the dark entrance of the church. "The keeper isn't just a man. He's a force of darkness. The shadows, the fog, he's the one who controls all of that. He can twist reality, make you see things that aren't there. His power comes from his ability to corrupt and manipulate everything around him." She paused, a tremble in her voice despite the firmness of her words. "You need to be careful. Every shadow you face is an extension of the keeper's will. They're strong, quick, and they don't hesitate. If we stick together, use light and reflections, and fight smart, we have a chance. But only a chance." Mia felt the collective weight of Clara's warnings settle into her resolve. Every word was a stark reminder of the battle ahead. Suddenly, a loud, guttural roar erupted from inside the church. The sound sent chills through Mia's spine. The keeper's creatures were already aware of their presence. They were closer than she'd imagined. "They're coming," she said, her voice steady despite the terror creeping into her chest. "We need to get the barricades in place and prepare the traps. Let's move quickly." The resistance members sprang into action, reinforcing the barricades with planks of wood and scrap metal. Mia helped position mirrors along the perimeter of the entrance, angling them to reflect any available light. Each mirror became a potential weapon, a tool to push back the shadow's darkness. Frank handed her a makeshift sword, a blade crafted from an old railing and sharpened metal. "This is for close combat. If a shadow gets too close, don't hesitate. Strike first. We don't have the luxury of mercy." She took the weapon, feeling its cold, jagged edge. Her hands trembled briefly, but she steadied herself. "Clara, get on the lookout," she shouted. "Warn us if you see any shadows approaching." Clara climbed up a rusted ladder onto a stack of crates near the entrance. From her elevated position, she would have a better view of the streets and any approaching threats. Her eyes scanned the dark alleyways and rooftops, every shadow an enemy she had to keep track of. As the resistance worked together, Mia felt a sense of unity and purpose solidify among them. They were no longer individuals fighting their own battles. They were a team, a collective force determined to reclaim Eldwood. Suddenly, a noise came from the shadows, a faint whisper that felt almost human. Mia glanced to the side and saw a flicker of movement. A shadow creature appeared, its form partially materializing and disappearing into the darkness. Its eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent light. "It's one of the Keeper's scouts," Frank growled, positioning himself between Mia and the approaching shadow. The creature lunged at them with quick, jerky movements. Its claws were sharp, glinting with a menacing edge. But Mia, with the makeshift sword in hand, stood her ground. She took a deep breath and swung the blade with all her strength. The creature staggered backward, its shadowy form wavering. Frank joined her, striking with his own weapon. Together, they pushed the creature back, forcing it to retreat into the darkness. "Keep your eyes open," Mia shouted to the others. "We'll fight together. No one's alone here." She felt a surge of courage, a fire that refused to be extinguished. The resistance members stood their ground, weapons ready, eyes focused, and their collective determination grew stronger with every encounter. Suddenly, Clara's voice rang out from the lookout position. "They're coming. The shadows are moving through the streets. We need reinforcements. More shadows are approaching fast." The shadows surged from every corner, more formidable and numerous than Mia had anticipated. The fog thickened around the church entrance, creating a swirling, oppressive barrier that obscured everything. "We need to activate the traps," Mia yelled. She signaled to the resistance members to pull levers and light the makeshift explosives. Smoke bombs were placed strategically around the perimeter. The reflective panels were adjusted to catch whatever faint light they could find. As the shadows drew closer, Mia felt her heart pounding faster. She struck at the incoming shadows with her makeshift sword, each clash a brutal test of stamina and will. The smoke bombs released thick clouds of dark smoke, disorienting the shadows momentarily. The mirrors reflected every flicker of light back at the creatures, pushing them away from the entrance. But despite their efforts, the shadows continued to advance. They were relentless, their attacks becoming faster and more coordinated. Suddenly, a powerful voice echoed from within the church. The Keeper's voice, a guttural echoing sound that seemed to seep into Mia's bones. "You will not reclaim Eldwood," the Keeper growled. "This town belongs to me. Darkness will reign, and there is nothing you can do to stop it." His words sent a chill through her entire body. But Mia refused to let the fear take hold. She clenched her jaw, sweat dripping down her face, eyes locked on the entrance to the church. "We won't stop. Not now, not ever," she shouted back. She felt the resistance members rally around her, fighting with renewed energy. The collective strength of the group pushed back the shadows. Every strike, every trap, every mirror adjustment was a testament to their determination. With every enemy repelled, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. The resistance members fought not just for survival but for the town's rebirth. Each encounter was a battle won, each shadow pushed back a step forward. Mia knew that the fight was far from over. The Keeper's darkness was a formidable enemy, but she had something the Keeper could never take: unity, resilience, and the unwavering determination of the people who refused to surrender. Together they would fight until Eldwood was free once more. Mia felt her resolve deepen with each clash, each scream, and every fleeting victory. She would reclaim her town, no matter what it took. The night continued to press heavily on Eldwood, the shadows refusing to retreat despite the resistance's efforts. The fog lingered like an oppressive shroud around the old church entrance, a swirling mass of darkness that refused to dissipate. Mia's arms ached, sweat mixed with grime dripping from her forehead, but she stood tall. Her breath was steady, though her muscles felt like they were about to give way. Every battle had left bruises and cuts, but none of that mattered now. She knew this was the fight that would define everything, the fight to reclaim Eldwood. The echoes of shadows retreating temporarily gave the resistance a brief moment of reprieve. The members regrouped, their breathing ragged but their eyes filled with purpose. The smoke had cleared just enough for Mia to see Frank wipe a smudge of soot from his face. Clara's eyes were sharp as ever, scanning every corner of the streets from her lookout position, a flicker of determination never leaving her gaze. "What now?" Frank gasped, his voice hoarse but unwavering. Mia glanced at the makeshift barricades, the reflective panels angled to reflect even the smallest bit of light. "We need to push closer to the heart of the Keeper's fortress. The Keeper won't just wait around. We need to find where he's hiding." Clara, still perched high on the crates, called down to them, her voice urgent. I see movement in the east alley. Shadows are coming. A lot of them. Her words sent a fresh wave of tension through the group. We need to strengthen our perimeter and stay ready, Mia shouted. Prepare the explosives and tighten the barricades. We fight together, every one of us. Remember, the shadows will try to isolate us. Don't let that happen. She looked around at the resistance members, each person fighting their own fear but standing together. They nodded, their determination evident despite their exhaustion. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the night. It came from the east side of the town square. The scream was short and cut off abruptly, a grim reminder of the shadow creature's ruthless efficiency. Mia's gut twisted at the sound. They're attacking someone, she said, a knot of fear twisting in her stomach. Let's go, Frank said, a grim determination settling on his face. Mia and Frank, with Clara's guidance from above, took off toward the source of the scream. The streets were filled with unsettling shadows that flicked back and forth like specters. Each turn they took brought them closer to the epicenter of the attack. The fog thickened with every step, wrapping around them like a living entity. Suddenly, a figure stumbled out of the fog, blood streaking his face, eyes wide with terror. It was one of the resistance scouts, barely able to stand. The keeper, he's stronger than we thought, the scout choked out before collapsing onto the pavement. Mia knelt by his side, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Tell me everything. What did you see? The scout's breathing was shallow, his voice barely a whisper. The keeper, he controls everything. Shadows, fog, reality. He's not just a man. He's something darker than you can imagine. He's in the church. The core of his power is there. His eyes flickered before he fell into unconsciousness. She glanced up at Frank, her eyes meeting his. We have to move quickly. We need to find a way to confront him. They pressed on through the fog, the resistance members following closely, their resolve unyielding. Mia felt the shadows close in on them, the fog blinding and disorienting them, but she pushed through. Suddenly, Clara's voice came from the lookout post again. They're coming in waves. The shadows, they're fast, coordinated. We need something bigger, something more strategic. She tossed down a bundle of ropes tied with metal hooks. Use these. Set traps near the streets and alleys. We need to slow them down. Mia took the ropes, feeling the responsibility of every decision settling on her shoulders. She turned to Frank and the others, assigning tasks and strategies. We set up mirrors along the streets, she said. The reflective panels will push back the shadows. We'll use smoke bombs in the narrow alleys to create confusion. We'll create illusions that disorient them. We fight smart, not just hard. Her voice grew louder, a rallying cry for the resistance members. We reclaim Eldwood together, every one of us. No one gets left behind. We fight as a team. We stand together, we live together, and if we fall together. She felt the energy of the group strengthen with her words, their collective resolve renewing with each shout. Suddenly, the shadows surged forward, a black wave moving with unnatural speed. Mia saw their glowing eyes piercing through the fog, a chilling reminder of the keeper's presence. The first shadow lunged at Mia, claws extended. She sidestepped at the last moment, swinging her makeshift sword. The blade clashed with the shadow's form, sending a burst of dark energy backward. Frank tackled another shadow, their struggle fierce and unyielding. Clara continued to call out positions, guiding their every move with sharp observations. Smoke bombs erupted along the streets, filling the narrow alleys with dense, stifling clouds that disoriented the enemy. The mirrors reflected fragmented images of light, casting the shadows into confusion. But the keeper's shadows didn't stop. They regrouped, their attacks becoming more aggressive. The fog thickened again, more suffocating, more blinding. Shadows reached for the resistance members, their claws like razor-sharp weapons. Suddenly, a loud, unearthly roar emanated from inside the church. The keeper himself was coming. The shadows stopped for a moment, retreating just a bit, the fog temporarily easing. In that brief pause, Mia felt an overwhelming, cold fear settle in her chest. The keeper stood at the entrance of the church, a dark figure taller than any man, his body wrapped in tattered shadows, his eyes glowing with malevolent light. You will not win, Mia, his voice boomed, a sound that made the ground tremble. This town belongs to me. Darkness reigns, and you are powerless to stop it. Mia stood firm, her hands trembling but her resolve unwavering. I will stop you. Eldwood will rise again. We fight until the end, she shouted back, her voice a beacon of defiance. She glanced at her team, each member resolute despite their fear. They stood together, eyes locked with Mia's, a collective force that refused to break. The keeper raised his hand, and the shadows surged forward with renewed strength. The fight intensified, a chaotic, brutal clash of wills. The resistance members fought with every ounce of strength, every trap, every tool at their disposal. Mia felt her strength fading but pushed through the exhaustion. She saw Frank pushing back shadows with a brutal determination, Clara's voice never wavering even in the thickest fog, and each resistance member fighting with a unity that felt almost unstoppable. Together, they were not just a group of individuals. They were a force that refused to surrender. Every strike, every trap, every mirror angle was a step closer to reclaiming Eldwood. The Keeper's power was formidable, but Mia knew that strength came from unity, resilience, and the refusal to stop. She felt hope flicker within her, a quiet determination that said Eldwood would rise again. Not through shadows, but through light, courage, and the unbreakable will of a community that would fight until the darkness was pushed back forever. She raised her sword one final time, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that no matter the cost, she would never stop fighting for Eldwood. The Keeper's dark eyes met Mia's, a swirling void of shadow and menace. His gaze felt like a poison seeping into her soul, trying to erode her resolve. The shadows surged forward, a black tide that threatened to swallow everything in their path. But Mia didn't falter. She tightened her grip on the makeshift sword, sweat mingling with the grime on her face, and met the enemy with the full force of her determination. "Push back," she shouted to the resistance members. "Don't let him take Eldwood. Not now. Not ever." Frank charged at a group of shadows with a roar, his makeshift weapon swinging with the kind of fury that only comes from true determination. He moved like a man possessed, refusing to let fear take over. Shadows clawed at him, but he fought back relentlessly, refusing to let any enemy get the upper hand. Clara continued to move around the perimeter of the barricades, her eyes sharp as ever, calling out positions and locations with quick, calculated observations. More shadows coming from the west side. "We need reinforcements there." The resistance members followed her instructions without hesitation, setting up mirrors at strategic positions and tossing smoke bombs to obscure the alleyways. Each trap, each reflective panel, each makeshift barricade was a piece of their collective resistance, a symbol of their refusal to yield. Mia could see more shadows forming near the Keeper, their shapes solidifying out of the fog. The Keeper himself stood tall and imposing, a dark figure of menace that radiated malevolence. His presence alone seemed to sap their energy. "You think you can stop me, Mia?" the Keeper growled, his voice a guttural hiss that made the ground beneath their feet shake. "I am the darkness. I am the Keeper of Eldwood. You will kneel before me or you will perish." His voice was a chilling reminder of the force they were up against. Mia's breath quickened, but she pushed down the rising fear. She knew that fear would only give the Keeper more power. "No," she shouted back. "We'll never kneel. We'll never stop fighting." She lunged at the Keeper, sword raised, every muscle in her body screaming from exhaustion but her resolve stronger than ever. The Keeper raised a hand and a surge of dark energy erupted from his palm, a blast that sent Mia flying backward. She crashed onto the cobblestones, pain radiating through her body. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to sit up. Shadows began to close in on her, their claws reaching for her throat, their eyes glowing with hunger. But before they could reach her, Frank appeared again, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but his eyes fierce. He grabbed a pipe from a nearby barricade and swung it with all his strength, knocking the shadows back. "Get up, Mia. We're not done yet." She felt his words like a spark in the darkness, a reminder that the fight wasn't over. She crawled back onto her feet, the makeshift sword trembling but still in her grip. "I won't stop," she whispered through gritted teeth. Clara's voice came through the chaos once more. "There's a weakness in the fog, near the old bakery. It's thin. If we can push the Keeper there, we might have a chance." Her words were a lifeline, a thread of hope in the midst of the overwhelming darkness. Mia looked at Frank, Clara, and the rest of the resistance. "We move to the bakery. We push back. Together." The resistance members regrouped quickly, their breaths steadying. They moved as a single unit, setting traps and positioning mirrors as they advanced. The fog seemed to fight back, the shadows closing in with relentless speed, but the resistance refused to waver. They pushed forward step by step, each battle a test of their endurance and unity. Each shadow they pushed back felt like a small victory, a piece of Eldwood's fight reclaiming its ground. Finally, they reached the old bakery, a crumbling building with cracked windows and rusted metal shutters. The fog thinned here just as Clara had said. The keeper's shadows hesitated, unsure, their dark forms flickering momentarily in confusion. This was the moment. Mia felt a surge of energy, knowing that the Resistance's collective spirit had brought them here. She raised her sword one more time, eyes locking with the keeper's. This is it. Let's finish this together. The Resistance members charged at the shadows with renewed energy. They pushed, pulled, struck, and repelled with everything they had. Frank led the charge, a force of nature, his every movement a testament to resilience. Clara continued to guide the group, her voice a constant beacon of strategy and clarity. Mia fought side by side with Frank, pushing back the keeper's forces with every ounce of strength she had. She felt the fog retreating, the shadows faltering under the relentless light of their determination. The keeper let out a roar of fury, his dark form beginning to fade as the shadows around him lost their strength. You cannot win, the keeper hissed, his voice weakening as the resistance closed in. But Mia stood tall, the fear that had tried to creep into her heart now replaced with fierce resolve. Yes, we can. And we will. With a final, decisive swing of her sword, she struck the keeper's dark form. The shadows around him disintegrated into smoke, disappearing into the fog. Silence settled over the streets of Eldwood. The fog began to lift, the oppressive darkness retreating as light started to seep back into the town. The Resistance members stood breathing heavily, bruised and battered but victorious. Mia looked around at her team, tears of relief filling her eyes. Eldwood was not lost. They had pushed back the darkness. Together, they had reclaimed the town from the keeper's grip. We did it, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Frank nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Eldwood belongs to us, not to him. The Resistance members gathered together, standing tall despite their injuries, a testament to their unity and resilience. Mia knew this fight was far from over. The keeper was only the beginning. Eldwood had scars to heal, shadows to dispel, and hope to rebuild. But with every step forward, she felt the strength of the town, the courage of the Resistance, and the belief that together, they would rebuild Eldwood stronger than ever before. She turned to face the town square, the town that now, against all odds, stood a beacon of defiance, light, and resilience. Eldwood would rise again, and this time, it would rise with the determination to never fall again. The dawn began to break over Eldwood, a thin, fragile light creeping over the horizon and casting a pale glow over the town's battered streets. The fog was retreating, but its lingering presence still clung to the air, a faint reminder of the horrors they had just faced. The streets were littered with remnants of battle, broken barricades, shattered glass, soot-stained walls, and the twisted metal of weapons. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of cautious triumph. Mia stood at the center of the town square, her eyes scanning the damage around her. The Resistance members were tending to their injured, reinforcing barricades and checking traps. The fight was not yet over, but a spark of hope had been ignited. Eldwood was no longer under the keeper's absolute control, but the town still bore the heavy weight of the battle's aftermath. She took a shaky breath, the adrenaline of battle slowly ebbing away. Frank walked up to her, bruised and scraped but standing tall. "We did it," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the fatigue he felt. "We pushed back the darkness. Eldwood is ours again." Mia nodded, the reality of their victory sinking in bit by bit. But she also knew that victory didn't mean safety. The keeper was still out there somewhere and he wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. "We can't let our guard down," Mia finally said. "The keeper's darkness is still lurking, and Eldwood is not completely free. We need to find out where he fled. We need to finish this." Frank nodded in agreement. "Let's start by checking the church. There might be clues about where the keeper went." Together, they moved through the town square, navigating through debris and burnt remnants of homes. The townsfolk began to emerge cautiously from their hiding places, their faces etched with fear but also determination. Eldwood had survived, but the people knew that survival was just the beginning. It was time to rebuild, to fight back, and to reclaim their town fully. Mia and Frank made their way to the church, now partially in ruins but still standing tall. The massive doors were charred, the windows cracked. The smell of burnt wood and smoke lingered in the air. As they pushed open the door, a chill ran down Mia's spine. The interior was dark, the shadows still clinging to the corners of the pews, remnants of the keeper's presence. She cautiously stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under her boots. The inside of the church was a grim reminder of the battle that had taken place here. The shattered pews, the broken stained glass windows, and the soot-covered altar at the center. "Look at this," Frank said, pointing to a small, torn piece of cloth caught on a splintered pew. It was a fragment of the keeper's tattered robes, a clue that they had been on the right path. Mia picked up the cloth and examined it. The dark fabric was frayed, stained with a mix of soot and shadow residue. She felt a cold sensation run through her body as she looked at it. "This could be a clue," she said. "Let's search the altar. Maybe there's something we missed." The altar at the center of the church was twisted and scarred. Mia and Frank carefully moved around it, scanning every corner. That's when Frank spotted something half hidden beneath the shattered cross on the altar. A journal. He picked up the tattered book, the pages worn but still intact. The leather cover was smeared with dark, sticky residue. Opening it cautiously, they found a series of notes scrawled in shaky handwriting, evidence of the keeper's descent into madness. "I am becoming more. The shadows are stronger than ever. Eldwood will kneel, I will make sure of that. But my time is running short. They are coming. The resistance is stronger than I anticipated." Mia read aloud, the words sending chills down her spine. "He knows he's losing control. But if he's retreating, we need to find out where he's hiding now." She flipped through the journal until she found another entry. This one was more cryptic, but it gave them a hint of a location. A place where shadows eat light. The Hollow. The keeper's true fortress lies there. Hidden. Protected by the remnants of darkness and treachery. Only one who knows the shadows intimately can breach it. "The Hollow," Frank repeated, his brow furrowing. "That's on the edge of Eldwood. An abandoned part of town where buildings have been overtaken by darkness. We need to move fast before the keeper strengthens his forces again." Mia nodded, a renewed determination settling in her chest. "We'll take every precaution. The resistance will follow. We need to make sure we're ready for whatever we find there." They quickly gathered the resistance members near the town square. Everyone stood in a rough circle, their faces showing exhaustion but their eyes burning with purpose. "We go to the Hollow," Mia said, speaking to the group. "The keeper is retreating, but Eldwood is still at stake. We have to push forward. We reclaim every part of this town. No shadow will rule Eldwood. We fight as one until we have driven the darkness out completely." The resistance members exchanged nods, their unity stronger than ever. Each person, despite bruises and exhaustion, felt the collective power of the group. Eldwood was not just a town, it was a community that refused to die. The streets of Eldwood began to empty as the resistance members prepared their weapons, reinforced their traps, and secured their barricades. Everyone knew that the Hollow would be a battle unlike any other. It would be a place where survival would mean everything. Mia and Frank took the lead, moving swiftly through the town, navigating through twisted alleys and ruins. The shadows seemed to grow darker with each step, the fog thicker, the air colder. It felt like stepping into an even deeper nightmare. As they approached the edge of Eldwood, the remnants of the Hollow became visible. Broken buildings loomed tall but were overtaken by darkness, their windows shattered, and the doors barely clinging to their hinges. A sudden noise caught their attention. A faint whisper, barely audible over the creaking buildings and rustling shadows. "We're not alone," Frank muttered, his eyes narrowing. From the shadows emerged small groups of creatures, remnants of the keeper's forces. Their eyes glowed with eerie light, and their movements were quick and erratic. Mia raised her sword, every muscle in her body tensing. "Let's finish this together." She charged forward, her heart pounding but her resolve unbroken. Frank followed closely, their swords clashing with the dark creatures with every strike. The resistance surged forward with them, a collective force that refused to break. They set traps along the alleyways, using mirrors, smoke bombs, and barricades to outwit the shadows. But the Hollow was not just about brute force, it was a test of strategy, courage, and unity. Each step forward brought challenges that required quick thinking and precise action. They fought through every shadow with calculated moves, every trap strategically placed, each person contributing with their skills and strength. Finally, after an intense and exhausting battle, they pushed back the keeper's creatures. The Hollow began to lose its oppressive darkness. Light started to seep back into the area as shadows disintegrated, smoke cleared, and the streets became visible once more. Mia stood at the center of the Hollow, breathing heavily but standing tall. Around her, the resistance members caught their breath, their eyes shining with victorious relief. Eldwood was beginning to reclaim itself piece by piece, shadow by shadow. But Mia knew this fight wasn't over. The keeper would not stop. Eldwood still had battles ahead, but they had taken the first step in reclaiming every corner of the town. She looked up at the sky, the dawn fully breaking, light spreading through Eldwood like a new beginning. She made a silent promise to herself and to every member of the resistance. Together, they would protect Eldwood until every shadow was gone, until the darkness was a distant memory, and light, hope, and resilience would reign supreme. Their fight had only just begun, but Mia knew one thing: they would never stop. Not now. Not ever. The streets of Eldwood began to transform before Mia's eyes. What was once a town gripped by shadows and despair now felt like a place where resilience was taking root. Each corner that the resistance reclaimed brought back a sliver of hope. But Mia knew it was not enough. The Keeper might have fled to the Hollow, but his forces were still out there. Eldwood would never be truly safe until they eradicated every trace of his darkness once and for all. She gathered the resistance members at the central square once more. They stood together, bruised but unbroken, their eyes reflecting the hard-won victories but also the resolve to finish what they had started. Now that we've secured the Hollow, we need to find the Keeper once and for all, she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that still lingered in her voice. We've learned a lot, but we need more than just brute strength. We need strategy, information, and precision. Frank nodded, his shirt still damp with sweat and blood. We need to figure out where the Keeper might go next. He won't stop until Eldwood falls. We need to outwit him. Clara stepped forward, her eyes sharp and calculating. There are rumors. People say they saw the Keeper moving toward the old train station on the east side of town. It's not heavily guarded, but it's a place filled with shadows. If we follow that path, we might catch him. Mia's heart quickened at the mention of the train station. This place had been a dead zone in Eldwood for years, a forgotten part of town filled with rusted tracks and derelict cars. It was a place where shadows thrived. We move at night, she finally said. Shadows are stronger in darkness, but we'll fight smarter. We'll set traps, use the mirrors, and create barriers. We'll bring him to ground and end this. The resistance members exchanged determined glances. They were tired, but their commitment to saving Eldwood was stronger than ever. That evening, the sky turned a murky purple as twilight settled over the town. The resistance prepared their gear, makeshift weapons, reflective panels, smoke bombs, and whatever supplies they could find. Everyone checked their weapons, secured their positions, and tightened their barricades. It was a methodical preparation that spoke of strategy and teamwork. Mia stood by the edge of the central square, her gaze fixed on the dark outline of the east side of town where the derelict train station loomed. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain composed. I'm scared, Frank admitted as he joined her, his voice a mix of vulnerability and grit. But if we let fear take us, we lose everything. Mia nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She put a hand on his shoulder. We're not alone. We fight together. Eldwood is ours, and we won't let the Keeper take it back. Let's make sure every shadow knows that. They silently made their way through the streets of Eldwood, the night creeping in like a thick fog. The shadows seemed more formidable under the dim streetlights, flickering ominously at the edges of alleyways and broken windows. As they approached the train station, the sounds of metal creaking and distant howls filled the air. The train station was a twisted structure of rusted tracks, derelict train cars, and shattered platforms. The Keeper's forces were scattered but still formidable. Creatures moved in the dark, their glowing eyes a constant threat. Suddenly, a loud, guttural growl came from the shadows to their left. A dark creature emerged, its limbs bent at unnatural angles, eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It lunged at Frank, a blur of shadows and claws. Frank twisted to the side, barely dodging the attack. He swung his makeshift sword with brute force, his muscles working overtime as he struck the creature back into the darkness. Keep moving, he shouted to Mia, his voice a mix of determination and adrenaline. She darted forward, sprinting through the wreckage and past rusted train cars. Every shadow she encountered was a test of her resolve. She planted mirrors along the pathways, positioning them at strategic angles to reflect light and push back the darkness. Suddenly, Clara's voice came through the radio strapped to Mia's chest. I see him. The Keeper. He's at the center platform. I'm moving into position now. Mia's heart raced at the news. She pushed forward with renewed energy, adrenaline replacing fatigue. She followed Clara's instructions, setting up smoke bombs and reflective panels as traps along the platform. As she finally reached the platform center, she saw the Keeper standing tall, his dark form more formidable than ever. His eyes glowed with malevolent power, his shadows shifting and swirling around him like a living storm. Come, Mia, the Keeper shouted, his voice a venomous challenge. You think you can stop me? Eldwood is already mine. Soon it will belong to the shadows forever. Mia raised her sword, the reflection of the mirrors casting glints of light across her face. "Not if we have a say in it." She charged at the keeper, her sword clanging against the keeper's dark arm as shadows surged forward to defend him. She fought with every ounce of strength, pushing back the keeper's force, each swing of her sword a testament to her determination. Suddenly, Clara appeared, a flash of resolve in the darkness. She launched a smoke bomb at the keeper's feet, creating a thick cloud that temporarily obscured everything. "Now's your chance, Mia." Through the smoke, Mia pushed forward, her breath ragged but her resolve unyielding. She struck the keeper with a powerful blow, forcing him to stumble backward. The shadows around him weakened slightly, disintegrating into wisps of smoke. "Let's finish this," she shouted, rallying Frank and the resistance members who were now fighting through the platform's wreckage alongside them. Together, they pushed back the shadows, setting up mirror after mirror to reflect light onto the keeper. The collective effort of the resistance, their unity and resilience, began to erode the keeper's strength. With one final, collective strike, they managed to overpower the keeper. His form crumbled into a heap of shadows that disintegrated into nothingness. Silence settled over the train station. The darkness that had threatened Eldwood began to retreat, the shadows dissipating with every breath the town took. Mia stood there, her breath heaving but a sense of triumph settling over her. Eldwood was on the brink of recovery, but she knew that vigilance was their new reality. She turned to Frank, Clara, and the resistance members. "This battle is just the beginning. We rebuild, we stand strong, and we protect Eldwood until every shadow is gone. Together." Their eyes met, a silent promise unspoken but understood. Eldwood had been tested, but it had survived, and now, with resilience, unity, and hope, it would rise stronger than ever. The shadows were retreating, but Mia knew this fight was far from over. Eldwood's heart beat stronger than ever, a beacon of light that refused to succumb to darkness. The days after the battle were filled with both rebuilding and reflection. Eldwood, once a town under the keeper's iron grip, was slowly reclaiming its lost vibrance. The streets were filled with the sound of hammering, glass being replaced, and walls being reinforced. The smoke that had lingered for weeks finally lifted from the town, and the townsfolk, tired but determined, worked side by side to heal their community. But Mia knew that victory was only a fleeting respite. The keeper may have been vanquished for now, but shadows could grow again if vigilance was lost. She stood at the heart of Eldwood, the town square now a symbol of resilience, but every victory brought new challenges. She stood tall, facing the townsfolk who gathered around her every evening, speaking words of hope and resolve. Eldwood was not just a town, it was a community that refused to crumble, and they would not let shadows take hold again. Mia's nights were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and planning. Frank, Clara, and other key members of the resistance worked tirelessly, ensuring that every corner of Eldwood was secured. Their mission was clear: to fortify the town so that shadows would never again infiltrate. "You have to rest, Mia," Frank said one evening after a particularly long meeting. "We've done everything we can for now, but we need you strong. Eldwood needs you." She nodded, but sleep came only in short, restless bursts. Her dreams were often filled with echoes of shadows, whispers of darkness, and visions of the keeper's piercing eyes. Even though the keeper was no longer in Eldwood, the fear he instilled remained. But Mia refused to let fear control her. She knew she had to be stronger than ever. One evening, Clara approached her with a makeshift map spread out across the table in the resistance headquarters. The map highlighted every critical point in Eldwood: the town square, the train station, the old church, and even small alleyways where shadows had once taken root. "We need to establish patrols," Clara said. "We'll rotate shifts, fortify key locations, and place mirrors and smoke bombs strategically. We need to make Eldwood impenetrable." Frank nodded beside her. "We've built barricades at the main entrances and placed traps along the alleyways. But we need more eyes on the streets. We need people ready to respond at a moment's notice." Mia leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the map. "Let's work with the townsfolk. Every person here is part of Eldwood now. We'll train them in defense tactics, mirror placement, and smoke bomb usage. Everyone should know how to protect their town." She looked up at her team. "This town belongs to all of us. It's not just about fighting shadows anymore. It's about rebuilding Eldwood, reinforcing our community, and ensuring we never fall under that darkness again." Weeks turned into months as Eldwood gradually became a symbol of resilience and unity. Town meetings became opportunities to teach self-defense tactics, set up watch stations, and strengthen community ties. Mia saw children learning to handle mirrors with precision, adults learning to set traps with quick reflexes, and elders sharing stories of Eldwood's history to remind everyone of their town's strength. But amid rebuilding there were still challenges. Small groups of shadows occasionally tried to infiltrate Eldwood. Each attack, no matter how small, was a test of their resolve. Mia stood on the rooftops with Frank one night, scanning the dark streets below. The shadows were no longer the force that once struck fear into Eldwood. Each shadow that tried to emerge was met with traps, mirrors, and the resistance members who were always ready to fight back. "I think we've made progress," Frank said, a smile breaking across his bruised face. "Eldwood isn't just surviving now. We're thriving." But Mia's gaze remained sharp. "We can't stop. As long as shadows exist, we have a fight. We'll keep our patrols, strengthen our barriers, and train everyone until Eldwood is a fortress that shadows can't penetrate." Then came a letter. One evening, a small courier arrived at the resistance headquarters with a tattered note. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. It was from a survivor of the last battle. "I saw him, the keeper. He didn't die. He fled eastward. There is a place beyond Eldwood where shadows gather. A place called the Abyss. If he's still out there, that's where he'll regroup." Mia read the letter aloud to Frank, Clara, and the resistance members gathered around. "The Abyss?" Clara repeated, her brow furrowing. "It's a desolate area filled with treacherous terrain and remnants of old factories. It's the perfect place for shadows to regroup and strike back." Frank stood up, his face a mask of determination. "Then let's find him. We'll go to the Abyss, finish what we started, and ensure the Keeper never comes back." They began planning an expedition to the Abyss. Every resistance member contributed their skills. Some prepared the weapons and traps, others set up reflective panels, and a few gathered supplies. Mia oversaw every detail, knowing that this mission would be the most dangerous yet. The night before they set out, Mia stood on the highest point of Eldwood Central Square. She looked at the stars above, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into her chest. "We will protect this town," she whispered. "Not just Eldwood, but every town that still stands against the shadows. We will fight until light triumphs, until shadows have no place left in our world." Her voice echoed through the square, a promise that every resistance member heard. They stood together in solidarity, their eyes reflecting the determination that would drive them into battle. The journey to the Abyss was treacherous. The terrain was rough and unforgiving, with cliffs, rusted factories, and remnants of broken machinery strewn across the landscape. Shadows lurked in every corner, but the resistance pressed on, fortified by their commitment to Eldwood and each other. Finally, they reached the heart of the Abyss. It was a cavernous area where shadows were thick, almost tangible. The Keeper stood in the center, his eyes filled with the darkness that once tried to consume Eldwood. "You came," the Keeper said, his voice a dark promise. "But Eldwood will fall, and I will ensure that light is extinguished." Mia stood firm, her sword raised. The final battle was fierce, shadows colliding against the reflective panels, smoke bombs blinding enemies, and the resistance using every trap and tactic at their disposal. But this time they fought smarter. Their unity, their experience, and their training were their greatest weapons. Mia's sword struck the Keeper down, each strike a testament to her commitment to Eldwood. As the Keeper fell, shadows began to disintegrate. Light seeped into the Abyss, dispelling the darkness completely. They returned to Eldwood victorious. The town had been tested but emerged stronger. Eldwood streets were alive with laughter again, children playing, and townsfolk rebuilding homes with renewed determination. Mia stood at the central square, looking at Frank, Clara, and the members of the resistance. "Eldwood is safe, but we stay vigilant. We will continue to stand together. We protect Eldwood, and we protect every light against the darkness." The resistance members raised their weapons in unity, a collective force committed to keeping Eldwood safe. Mia knew that shadows would never disappear entirely, but with their resolve, Eldwood would remain a beacon of light and hope, a town that stood tall against darkness, unyielding and unbroken. Together they would protect their town, ensure every shadow was banished, and bring light to every dark corner. Eldwood had become more than just a community. It was a symbol of resilience, courage, and unity. The fight was far from over, but for now, Eldwood stood strong, a testament to light prevailing over darkness, community standing together, and the unbreakable spirit of a town that refused to let shadows win. It was the kind of night that felt too quiet, too still. The kind that clings to you like a shadow, where every creak in the floorboards makes your skin prickle, and every gust of wind sounds like a whisper. But this night, this one night, felt different. And it had started like every other normal evening. Lena had just moved into the old house on Maple Street. She had heard the rumors, the whispers from neighbors about how the house had a history. But she didn't believe in ghosts. At least, not in the way most people did. She wasn't afraid of old houses or stories that people told to scare each other. But there was something about this place, something she couldn't quite shake. The house was large, far too big for just one person. Its old wooden floors groaned underfoot, and the walls, well, the walls seemed to breathe. Lena had tried to convince herself it was just the house settling, just the usual creaks and pops that come with age. After all, it was a place she'd bought on a whim, after a breakup and a desire to start over. But tonight, as the wind howled outside, there was something else. It was in the silence between the wind and the rain, a whisper so soft she thought it was just her imagination. It started faint, almost imperceptible, like a voice calling her name. Lena, unsure if she had heard it or if it was just the house, stood up from her chair. The room was dim, the flicker of the fireplace casting shadows against the walls. Lena, there it was again. Clearer this time. Her heart thudded. She froze. The voice, it wasn't in her head. It was real. Lena, it repeated, softer this time, but insistent. Lena turned towards the source of the sound. The house was quiet, but that whisper, it came from the walls. Her blood ran cold. The walls of the house weren't just creaking, they were whispering. She glanced around the room, but there was nothing. No one. She shook her head, telling herself it was just nerves. She hadn't been sleeping well lately, and stress had been mounting since she'd moved in. But then the sound changed. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a low, groaning sound, like the house was moaning under some unseen weight. Her pulse quickened. Lena stepped closer to the wall where she thought the sound had come from. The air in the room grew colder. A chill ran through her, but she reached out, pressing her hand against the wall, her fingers grazing the cold surface. There was nothing there, nothing but the silence. And then it happened. The walls shifted. It was subtle at first, like a shift in the air pressure, but then it became more pronounced, as if the house itself was trying to squeeze her out. She pulled her hand back quickly, eyes wide in disbelief. She could feel it. Something in the walls was alive. It was breathing. The room spun slightly, and Lena's heart raced as the air around her thickened with an unseen presence. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. Darkness. Her breath caught in her throat and panic set in. The whispering returned, louder, more frantic now. Lena, you have to leave. It wasn't a voice, not really. It was more like a vibration. A cold, desperate hum that seemed to come from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were all speaking to her now, begging her to go, urging her to get out. Lena stumbled back, her pulse pounding in her ears. But then, through the blackness, she saw it. A shape in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. It was a figure. A woman. Her face pale, almost translucent, but her eyes were dark, empty, and they locked onto Lena's with a cold intensity that sent a jolt of terror through her. The figure didn't move at first, just stood there in the shadows, but Lena could feel her gaze like a weight pressing down on her chest. Then the whispering stopped. The room was silent again, the only sound was the pounding of Lena's heart in her ears. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She was trapped. But the figure was still there, standing in the corner, watching her. The woman's mouth opened. Her lips cracked and split, her face contorting in a grimace. A low, guttural sound escaped from her throat. Lena, you're not alone, the figure whispered, her voice now unmistakable. The walls shook as if something inside them had been disturbed, a deep, rumbling groan that reverberated through the house. And then, before Lena could react, the figure vanished. Gone. Just like that. Lena gasped, stumbling back, her breath shallow. She felt sick. Her head was spinning, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. But no. She had to get out. She had to leave. The whispering began again. Louder, more urgent now. Lena, leave now. And that was when it hit her. The house wasn't just alive. It was trying to tell her something. The woman, the shape, the voice, it all pointed to one thing. She wasn't the first to hear these whispers. She wasn't the first to be warned. Something terrible had happened here. And Lena? She might be the next to vanish. But what was the house trying to protect her from? Lena had no choice. She had to find out. But to do that, she would have to listen to the house. And that was something she might regret. The silence in the room pressed down on Lena like a weight, suffocating her. She could feel the presence in the air, heavy, almost tangible. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The figure, the whispering, none of it made sense. She hadn't imagined it. She couldn't have. The cold, the pressure, the woman's eyes, it was all too real. Lena's body was frozen, her hands trembling as they gripped the edges of the armchair for stability. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs refused to move. It was as if the house itself was holding her captive, and she was its prisoner. She blinked hard, trying to shake off the panic, trying to force her mind to focus. The shape in the corner of the room was gone, and the walls had stopped shaking. But something remained. An oppressive weight, a lingering chill in the air, as if the house itself was watching her. Lena stood slowly, her feet unsteady beneath her. She could still hear the whispering in the back of her mind, echoing like a distant memory. "Lena, leave now." The voice hadn't just spoken to her, it had called her. It had known her name, her very essence. That thought alone was enough to send a jolt of terror through her veins. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. She couldn't just run from something she didn't understand. She had to know what was happening. She had to know why this house, this cursed place, was reaching out to her. The room was dark now, save for the faint glow of the embers in the fireplace. Lena's eyes darted around, scanning every corner, every shadow. Her mind raced. Was the woman still here? Had she left? Was it waiting for her to make the next move? Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The faintest outline, barely visible against the dark walls, was starting to take shape. A door, hidden in plain sight. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had walked past this wall countless times before. There was no door here, no doorway. Yet now, in the dim light, it was unmistakable. A door, slowly revealing itself as if the house was breathing it into existence. Her curiosity got the better of her, and despite the dread pooling in her stomach, she stepped toward the wall. The door was old, its wood dark and weathered, the metal handle rusted, yet somehow still intact. The closer she got, the more the whispers grew louder, swirling around her, filling the space, urging her forward. "Open it," they whispered. "See what lies behind." Lena swallowed hard, her throat dry, and her fingers hesitated for a moment before she reached out. The door handle was cool against her skin, and as she turned it, she could hear the groan of old metal. It felt like the house was protesting, like it didn't want her to open it. But she had come this far. She had to know. With a final turn, the door creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the abyss below. A chill ran through Lena's spine. The air was thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and something else. Something metallic. She hesitated at the edge of the doorway, staring down the staircase as the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe. The steps disappeared into the darkness, as though leading to nowhere. The whispers grew louder, clearer. "Asterisk, come down, Lena. Come find us, asterisk." Without thinking, Lena took a step forward. The floor beneath her feet seemed to hum, vibrating with each movement she made. Her hand was still gripping the doorknob, but she could feel it slipping from her grasp, as if the house itself was trying to pull her down into the depths. Lena swallowed her fear, forcing herself to descend the stairs. Each step felt like it took an eternity, and with each step the air grew colder. She pulled her sweater tighter around her, shivering despite herself. The whispers swirled around her, their voices growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like 1,000 voices were speaking at once. She reached the bottom of the stairs. The space in front of her was so dark she could barely see her hand in front of her face. She fumbled for a light switch, but the moment her fingers brushed the wall, she felt it, a presence. Something, or someone was there, standing just beyond her reach. Lena. The voice was so close now she could almost feel it on her skin. It was a woman's voice, but it sounded distorted, like it was coming from deep inside the walls. Lena's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to take another step forward. The darkness was overwhelming, consuming her, pulling her deeper into its embrace. The cold wrapped itself around her like chains. And then she saw it. A flicker of movement. It was a figure standing in the far corner of the room. This time the shape wasn't as faint, it was solid. A woman dressed in a dark, old-fashioned gown, her long black hair hanging over her face. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as the figure slowly turned to face her. There was something horribly familiar about her. The woman's face was pale, nearly translucent, and her eyes were wide, unblinking, dark as the night itself. "Lena," she whispered again, her voice barely audible but somehow penetrating Lena's very soul. "You're here, just like the others." The word sent a chill through Lena's body, making her blood run cold. The others? What did the woman mean? Without thinking, Lena took a step back, her mind racing for any explanation. But then the woman spoke again, her voice now filled with a sharp, chilling edge. You shouldn't have come here. This house, it traps souls. Lena froze. The words rang in her ears like a death sentence. Trap souls? Was this some kind of warning? You can't leave now, the woman continued, her form flickering like a broken signal. Once you've seen us, you belong to the house. There's no escaping. Lena's stomach churned as the figure seemed to dissolve into the darkness, her voice echoing long after her form had vanished. The room was silent once more. But Lena knew the truth now. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Alive in a way that was more than just ghosts and spirits. It was as if the house itself had become something ancient, something dark, and it had chosen her. Lena stood there, her heart hammering in her chest as the darkness seemed to close in around her. The weight of the woman's words lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. You belong to the house. Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was this a dream? A hallucination? There had to be an explanation. But the longer she stood in the cold, damp room, the more she realized that there was no simple answer. No comforting explanation that would make the fear and confusion melt away. She had come here to start over, to escape the pain of her past, but now she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The house was alive and it wanted her. That much was clear. The air grew colder still, the shadows in the room stretching longer, almost as if they were moving of their own accord. Lena looked around, searching for any sign of the woman, the figure from before, but there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the oppressive silence. And then it hit her, she wasn't alone. A sound, soft, barely perceptible, came from the far corner of the room. It was a scraping noise like nails on wood. Slowly, Lena's eyes tracked the sound, her gaze falling on an old dusty bookshelf that lined the wall. At first, it seemed innocuous enough, a relic of the house's forgotten past. But as Lena stared, her heart skipped a beat. The books were moving. At first, just a slight shift, as if something inside the shelf was pushing against them. But then, one by one, the books began to slide off the shelf and hit the floor with dull thuds. The scraping grew louder, more frantic. Lena took a step back, her breath shallow and quick. She didn't know what to make of this, whether it was just the house settling or something much worse, but she could feel it deep in her bones. This was no ordinary house. It was something else entirely. The scraping stopped suddenly, and for a moment, everything was still again. Lena didn't dare move. She didn't want to know what was going to happen next, but the pull, the curiosity was too strong. She had to know. She had to understand what was happening. With trembling hands, she took a step toward the bookshelf. It felt like a lifetime before her feet finally brought her to it. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, worn spines of the books. But before she could even touch one, a loud crash erupted behind her, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Lena spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the darkness now swallowing the room. A low chuckle, almost too faint to hear, echoed from somewhere deep in the shadows. The sound was impossible to place, a voice that was both familiar and foreign at the same time. It wasn't the woman, but it felt like it came from the same place, like the house itself was speaking to her. Lena. The voice purred, stretching her name out like a cold, icy wind. You can't leave. You're already part of us. Lena's legs felt like they would give out from under her. Her vision blurred as she stumbled back, crashing into the bookshelf. Books spilled to the floor in a cascade, and for the briefest of moments, the room was filled with a soft, distant hum. It was like a melody, a song that rose from the very walls of the house. A song of sorrow, of loss, and of death. The room was suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in on her, pushing her toward the only thing she could see, the door that had led her down here. The door that now seemed impossibly far away. Leave or stay? The voice whispered again, this time almost pleading. The choice is yours, but don't think it's easy. Don't think you can run away from what's already inside you. Lena's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't think straight, couldn't breathe. She had to get out of here, but she knew it was too late. The whispering, that constant hum, was everywhere now. It wasn't just in her head. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the very air she breathed. And with every passing second, the house seemed to grow more alive, more powerful. Lena could hear it now, a scratching like claws dragging against wood coming from all around her. She wasn't alone anymore. There were others here. Others trapped like her, lost in the endless dark. She could feel their presence like cold hands brushing against her skin. The door. She had to get to the door. Her body screamed in protest as she pushed herself to her feet, but she didn't care. She had to get out. She had to find a way to escape this place. The house was alive and it had claimed her. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the doorknob, but the moment she touched it, the house screamed. It was a sound unlike anything she had ever heard, a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the house. The walls groaned, the floor cracked, and the air became thick with something wrong. Lena's hand slid away from the doorknob as if it had been burned. She looked around, her breath shallow and fast. There was no way out. There was no escape. The house had taken its claim on her, and it wasn't about to let her go. And then she saw it, the shadow. A dark figure that loomed just beyond the door, just beyond the edge of the light. It was the same shape she had seen earlier, but now it was more than just a shadow. It was real. The woman. The one from the corner of the room. She stepped forward, her face emerging from the darkness. But this time it wasn't just her face. Her body was now visible, her clothes torn, her skin as pale as death itself. She looked broken, fractured. Lena. The figure whispered again, her voice a rasp, her eyes empty, voids that stared straight into Lena's soul. You can't leave us. You never could. Lena's breath hitched and she turned away, scrambling for any escape. But the house would not let her go. The walls closed in, the darkness thickened, and the figure moved closer, her cold, dead hand reaching out. Lena's mind was a blur of panic. The figure, the cold, the voices, it was all too much. Every part of her screamed to run, to escape, but the house had its grip on her, pulling her deeper into its darkness. The figure stepped closer, her footsteps silent but heavy. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, each beat feeling like it was about to break free. The woman's face, pale and broken, was just inches away now, her eyes wide and unblinking, locked onto Lena's with an intensity that felt like a physical force. You can't escape, Lena, the woman whispered, her voice harsh and guttural like something ancient. You're already here. You've always been here. Lena's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She backed away, her mind racing for any possible way out. The door. She had to reach the door. But it was no use. The moment she turned, she felt the pull of the house, like invisible chains wrapping around her, holding her in place. The woman's laugh echoed in the air, cruel and twisted. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a sound of someone who knew something she didn't. Something Lena wasn't ready to face. Why? Lena whispered, her voice shaking. Why me? The woman's lips curled into a smile, one that didn't belong to a living person. Her eyes flickered for a moment, and for just a brief instant, Lena saw something else in them. Something dark, something old. We've been waiting for you, the woman said, her voice a soft hiss. The house chose you, Lena. Just like it chose them. Lena's mind spun as she processed the woman's words. Who were they? Who had the house chosen before her? She could feel her pulse quicken, the panic rising again, threatening to overwhelm her. But before she could respond, the air around her shifted. The walls, once static and solid, began to pulse, like the heart of the house itself was beating. The temperature dropped even further, sending a shiver through Lena's entire body. It felt as though the house was alive, its very walls filled with hunger. Suddenly, the whispers started again, louder this time, filling her ears, drowning out all other sounds. Lena, stay with us, you belong here. The woman's figure wavered, her image flickering like a faulty television screen. For a moment, she seemed to disappear entirely, only to reappear inches from Lena's face, her cold breath chilling Lena's skin. Asterisk, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Asterisk. Lena's heart thudded painfully in her chest as the weight of the woman's words crashed down on her. The others, who were they? Who had the house claimed before her? And what had happened to them? Before she could ask another question, the woman lunged forward, her hand grasping at Lena's arm with an inhuman strength. It was cold, colder than anything Lena had ever felt before. A cold that sank deep into her bones, paralyzing her with fear. Lena gasped, her vision swimming. She tried to pull away, but the woman's grip was like iron. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Asterisk, you're ours now. You always have been. Asterisk. Panic surged through Lena's veins. She had to get away. She had to break free. With every ounce of strength she had, she yanked her arm, breaking the woman's hold, but the force of it sent her sprawling backward, crashing into the cold floor. The house seemed to shake beneath her, the walls groaning as though in pain. Lena scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around. The door. She had to get to the door. But when she turned to run, the door was gone. The walls, once solid, now appeared like they were shifting and moving, as though the very structure of the house was changing, warping to keep her inside. No, she thought desperately. Asterisk, I can't be trapped here. I can't let it win, asterisk. The woman's figure loomed closer again, her eyes never leaving Lena's. You can't leave, she said. You never can. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the woman stepped forward, and then, with a sudden lurch, everything went dark. When Lena opened her eyes, she wasn't where she had been before. The cold, oppressive air was gone. The walls were no longer pulsing with life. The woman's whispering voice had faded, replaced by a profound silence. She was in a different room now, one she didn't recognize. The walls were lined with old portraits, each one more unsettling than the last. The eyes of the people in the painting seemed to follow her, their gazes filled with judgment, accusation, as though they knew what she had done. What had happened? How had she ended up here? Lena slowly stood up, her legs shaky, her head spinning. She stumbled forward, her hands gripping the edge of a nearby table for support. But there was something wrong with this room. Something was off. It wasn't just the portraits or the strange, suffocating atmosphere. It was something else. She could feel it. A presence. It was in the room with her, watching her, waiting. She turned around, her eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The room felt smaller now, as though it were closing in on her, the walls pressing in, suffocating her. Lena stepped back, her breath coming in ragged bursts. And that's when she saw it. A reflection not in the mirror but in the glass of one of the paintings. At first, she thought it was just the way the light was hitting the glass. But as she looked closer, her blood ran cold. It wasn't her reflection staring back at her. It was the woman. The one from the dark room. The one who had been haunting her. But this time, the woman wasn't in the shadows. She was standing right behind Lena, her cold, ghostly hand reaching toward her. Lena, the woman whispered again, her voice a breath against Lena's ear. You're one of us now. Lena spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty. And yet, the whispers, the presence, it remained. The house was playing with her, toying with her mind. It wanted her to believe she was losing her grip on reality, that she was just imagining things. But Lena knew better. She had seen too much. The house had claimed her. And there was no escaping its clutches. With a final desperate glance at the painting, Lena turned and ran, her feet stumbling over the old, creaky floorboards. She needed to find a way out. She needed to break free before the house consumed her entirely. But the house wouldn't let her go that easily. Lena's feet pounded against the cold wooden floor, her breaths ragged and erratic as she ran through the house. The walls seemed to close in on her, narrowing her path, warping her sense of direction. Every corner she turned felt like a loop that only led her back to where she started. Her heart raced faster than her legs could carry her. She didn't know where she was going anymore. The house seemed to shift with every step, distorting its very structure as though it had a mind of its own. There was no logic here, no rhyme or reason. Just the cold, suffocating grip of something ancient and alive, waiting for her to slip up. The door. The exit. That was all she could think of. She had to find a way out. But as she continued down the dark hallway, the air around her thickened, became more oppressive. Every breath she took felt harder to draw, as though the very oxygen was being sucked out of the space around her. The temperature dropped. Her skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, of being hunted. She could feel it in her bones. The house was alive and it was playing with her. With every step, it was like the walls were pushing her deeper, pulling her into some unseen trap. The floorboards creaked, and the house groaned like an old man waking from a long slumber. It wasn't just the structure shifting, it was something more, something much worse. The sound of whispers grew louder, rising from the walls themselves, swirling around her in a maddening chorus of voices. Lena, stay with us, you can't leave. Her mind felt like it was being pulled in every direction at once. She couldn't focus. She couldn't think straight. Every corner she turned revealed more shadows, more darkness, as if the house was alive and growing, feeding off her fear. And then, just as she thought she couldn't take it anymore, she stumbled into a new room. This one was different, though. It was larger, more ornate. The furniture was old, and the walls were lined with strange, unsettling portraits of people whose eyes seemed to follow her every movement. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering candle in the corner, casting long, stretching shadows that seemed to move on their own. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling. A feeling that the house had been waiting for her to find this room, to lead her here. She slowly stepped forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath her weight. Her hands trembled as she reached out toward one of the portraits, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold, glass frame. The eyes of the figure in the painting seemed to watch her, their gaze unwavering. They looked too real, too alive. Before she could pull away, the candle in the corner flickered violently, casting the room into complete darkness for a moment. Lena gasped, her heart thudding in her chest. The air became thick with dread, like a weight pressing down on her from all sides. And then silence. Not the quiet silence that follows a storm, but a suffocating, all-encompassing silence that seemed to drain the very life from the room. There was no sound. No hum of the house's whispers. No creaks of the floorboards beneath her. Just the eerie stillness, broken only by her quickened breaths. Lena's mind raced. She tried to push the panic down, to focus, but the silence was too heavy, too pressing. She needed to move. She needed to get out of here before whatever was lurking in the dark corner of the room could reach her. That's when she heard it. A soft scraping noise. At first it was so faint she wasn't sure if it was real. Maybe it was just the house settling, the old wood creaking under the weight of time. But then the scraping grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the far end of the room, near the large ornate mirror that stood against the wall. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't see anything in the dark corner, but she felt it. Something was moving. Slowly. Stealthily. Something was watching her. Her legs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place. But then her eyes locked onto something in the shadows. A shape. A figure. It was a man. Tall, thin, and hunched over, his body twisted in ways that shouldn't be possible. His skin was pale, almost sickly, stretched tight over bones that jutted out unnaturally. His eyes were empty, hollow sockets staring at her with an eerie, unnatural calmness. Lena couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She was trapped. The figure took a step forward, its foot scraping along the floor. Each step it took was slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the fear that radiated off of her. Don't move, she told herself, but her body betrayed her. Her legs gave out, and she crumpled to the ground, her hands scrambling to push herself back up, but the floor felt slick, as though the shadows themselves were trying to hold her in place. Lena, the voice came from the figure's lips, but it wasn't a voice that belonged to a living man. It was deep and guttural, like it had been dragged from the depths of the earth itself. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure took another step forward, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. It wasn't just the figure she was afraid of, it was the presence behind it, the suffocating darkness that clung to the air, the palpable sense that something else was behind the figure, pulling the strings. The house, she thought. Asterisk, the house is controlling it, is controlling everything, asterisk. And then, without warning, the figure lunged forward. Its hand reached out, and as it did, Lena finally found her voice. "Enough," she screamed, her voice ragged, full of terror. But it was too late. The figure's cold hand closed around her wrist with an unnatural strength, pulling her toward it. She fought, but the grip was like iron, too strong, too cold. "Stay with us, Lena," the voice whispered as though it were laughing. "You can't escape us." Lena struggled desperately, but the darkness was swallowing her whole. Her vision blurred, her body growing weak from the cold, from the suffocating grip the house had on her. And then, just as she thought she couldn't take it any longer, the figure vanished. The room went silent again. Lena's heart hammered in her chest as she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. It wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. She had imagined it. She had to have. But as she sat there in the dark, the house around her seemed to whisper once more. Asterisk, "You belong to us, Lena." Asterisk. Lena's body trembled, her muscles aching from the strain of her desperate flight through the house. Every corner she turned seemed to lead her deeper into its labyrinthine heart. The walls pulsed as if alive, and the air itself seemed to conspire against her, growing thicker with each passing moment. It was as if the house was trying to swallow her whole, digesting her fear, pulling her into its darkness. For what felt like an eternity, Lena wandered aimlessly. The faint glow of a dimly lit hallway ahead beckoned her. Each step forward was like a betrayal of her own senses. The world was growing more distorted, more unfamiliar with each room she passed through. Suddenly, the low, whispering voices returned, and this time they weren't just murmurs. They were louder, urgent, insistent, and surrounding her. It felt as though the very walls were speaking, pressing into her mind. Asterisk, "Lena, you can't escape. You belong here." Asterisk. Her heartbeat quickened, her skin prickling with terror. She clasped her hands over her ears, but the voices were inside her head now, echoing, crawling beneath her skin. There was no escaping them. No escaping the house. But as the voices grew louder, a new sensation crept over her. It wasn't just the whispers. There was something else, something much more sinister. A presence. Something ancient and powerful watching her, waiting. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, suffocating her, making it difficult to breathe. She had to get out. She had to leave. She didn't care where she went as long as it was away from here. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving, stumbling down the hallway, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to stretch longer with each step she took. There were doors, but none of them led to freedom. They were just more rooms, more corridors. She had been here before, hadn't she? But then, in the distance, Lena saw something, a figure. At first, she thought it was another trick of the light, a shadow shifting in the corner of her eye. But no, this figure was real. It was standing in the middle of the hallway, its back turned toward her. Tall and gaunt, it wore a long, tattered coat, its hair hanging in dark, greasy strands. Lena froze. The figure was motionless, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The figure slowly turned around, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Its eyes were dark, hollow pits, and its skin seemed to stretch too tight over its bones. Its mouth, too wide, split open into a grotesque smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The look it gave her, that terrible, knowing look, said everything. Asterisk, you can't run. You can't hide, asterisk. The air around her grew colder, and Lena's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs refused to move. The creature started walking toward her, each step measured, deliberate. Suddenly, a shriek cut through the air. A high-pitched, ear-splitting wail that reverberated off the walls. It was the kind of scream that didn't sound human, that didn't sound alive. Lena spun around, trying to find the source of the sound, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the shriek echoing from all directions. She couldn't tell where it was coming from. The sound filled her ears, driving her mad. Then she saw them. At first, they appeared as fleeting shapes, just shadows moving quickly in and out of the corners of her vision. But soon they became clearer. Figures, one by one, emerging from the darkness. Faces twisted in agony, bodies deformed and misshapen. Souls trapped in the house, cursed to walk its halls for eternity. Lena recoiled, her stomach churning. The figures moved toward her, and as they did, she could hear their voices, soft, mournful whispers that filled the air. Help me. Please, end it. Asterisk, we never left. We never escaped. Asterisk. Lena's throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick with sorrow, with grief, with despair. These were the lost souls, the ones who had come before her, the ones who had tried and failed to leave. They were trapped here just like her. One of the figures stepped closer. A woman, her face gaunt and hollow, her eyes wide with fear and regret. She reached out a trembling hand toward Lena. Don't make the same mistake we did, she whispered, her voice a soft rasp. Asterisk, you can't escape. You're already part of it now. Asterisk. Lena stepped back, her body shaking. The room was spinning. Her mind was slipping. The whispers, the wails, the eyes of the lost souls, it was too much. Too overwhelming. But the figure kept coming, its hand reaching for her, its voice growing louder. Asterisk, you have to help us. You have to let us free. Asterisk. Stop. Lena screamed, pushing the figure away, but it was no use. Her hands passed right through it as though it was nothing more than air. She stumbled backward, tripping over something hard and cold beneath her feet. She hit the floor with a crash, gasping for air. The whispers were all around her now, clawing at her, suffocating her. The lost souls were closing in, their mournful cries filling the space, echoing in her ears. Please, just let me go, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to the souls or to the house itself, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't take this anymore. She couldn't fight it. She couldn't escape. The figures loomed over her, their hollow eyes watching her with sadness and longing. They weren't angry, not anymore. They were lost, and they wanted her to join them. To be lost too. Suddenly, the creature appeared again, its twisted grin stretching wider, its eyes glowing with malice. Asterisk, you can't leave, Lena. Asterisk, the voice was cold, void of any empathy. It was a voice of absolute control, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as the room seemed to close in on her. She could feel her body growing weaker, the cold of the house seeping deeper into her bones. It was pulling her in, dragging her toward the very heart of it, where there would be no return. You belong to the house now, Lena, the creature whispered. Asterisk, just like the others. There is no escape. Asterisk. Lena closed her eyes, the tears falling freely now, mixing with the cold sweat on her brow. She had come so far, but now it felt like she was slipping into something even darker. The house had claimed her, just like it had claimed all the others. There was no way out. Not for her. And as the last of the light flickered and died, Lena felt herself being swallowed by the dark. The darkness pressed down on Lena like a physical force, heavier than it had ever been before. Her lungs burned for air, but each breath seemed to grow more shallow, as if the atmosphere itself were made of thick, suffocating fog. The lost souls, their mournful wails echoing in the distance, seemed to be closing in on her. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. The creature stood over her, its grotesque smile growing wider, its eyes now glowing with an unearthly light. Lena's heart hammered in her chest, every beat vibrating through her body like an electric shock. She could feel its presence, its malice, drawing closer. She was paralyzed, pinned in place by something more potent than fear, something primal. The sheer weight of it was like being submerged under ice-cold water, unable to rise, unable to escape. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, hoping that if she couldn't see it, maybe it wouldn't be real. But the whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent, as if the house itself was speaking to her, telling her that there was no escape. "You're already one of us, Lena. You will never leave, forever trapped in the house." Her pulse raced faster, and with a burst of adrenaline, Lena forced herself to move. Her legs shook, her entire body trembling, but she pushed herself off the floor, crawling desperately toward the farthest corner of the room. Her hands scraped against the cold, rough floor, leaving streaks of dirt and sweat in their wake. She needed to get up. She needed to get away. But as she looked up, the room seemed to warp, its walls stretching and bending as if the very architecture of the house was shifting to prevent her from leaving. The portraits on the walls, the ones she had passed earlier, no longer seemed like mere paintings. Their eyes followed her every movement, their gazes burning with a malevolent awareness. Their mouths moved in silent whispers as if they were warning her, urging her to stay. Lena turned to see the figure moving toward her again. Its pale, skeletal fingers reached out, inching closer with each step. Its body swayed unnaturally like it was walking on air. It seemed to draw power from the house itself, an extension of its will. She could hear its footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the silence like a funeral march. "Why? Why won't you leave me alone?" Lena gasped, her voice hoarse, cracked with fear. She could barely recognize it as her own voice. The creature's smile stretched even wider, and it spoke, its voice a hollow, gravelly echo that seemed to reverberate inside her skull. "Asterisk, you think you can leave? You think you can escape us? You cannot. You are already ours. Asterisk." Lena recoiled from the creature, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She couldn't let it touch her. She couldn't allow herself to be swallowed by the house, just like the others. The thought of becoming another lost soul, trapped forever in this place, filled her with a deep, gnawing terror. But there was something worse, something more horrifying, lurking in the depths of the house. Something that felt older, more malevolent than even the creature before her. She could feel it now, a presence that filled the very air around her, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just one force, it was all of them. All the souls that had been trapped in the house over the years. All the torment, all the anguish, all the rage, they were together, united by the will of the house. And they were calling to her. Lena's vision blurred, the room spinning around her as she staggered to her feet, her mind reeling. The whispering voices seemed to echo from every direction, their words becoming a maddening chant that seemed to consume her thoughts. "Come with us, Lena. Join us, Lena. You can't escape." She clutched her head, pressing her palms to her ears in a futile attempt to block out the deafening sounds. But the whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder, more insistent. The voices were no longer just words. They were feelings, emotions that rushed through her like a tidal wave, suffocating her, drowning her in sorrow. "How could you leave us, Lena? Asterisk, you can't survive outside. You belong with us, asterisk." Her thoughts raced, frantically trying to find something, anything, that would break the hold this house had over her. Her mind flickered back to the stories she had heard before coming here. The warnings of those who had stayed too long. The warnings of those who had been claimed by this place. The stories of people who disappeared, never to be seen again. And the common thread between all of them? They had forgotten what it felt like to be free. They had given in to the house's grip, had allowed themselves to be consumed by it. They were no longer individuals. They were just lost souls, mindless puppets who wandered these halls, forever searching for something they would never find. Lena couldn't allow that to happen to her. She refused to become another of the house's victims. She wasn't like them. She wasn't going to let herself be consumed. With a strength she didn't know she had, Lena forced herself to her feet, her legs trembling as she steadied herself. The figure loomed closer, its skeletal hand reaching for her, but Lena pushed herself forward. She ran, her feet pounding against the cold, creaking floor, her eyes fixed on the door at the far end of the room. It was her only chance, her only way out. But just as she reached for the doorknob, the air shifted again. The temperature dropped to a bone-chilling cold, and the whispering voices turned into a deafening roar. She felt herself being pulled back, a cold hand wrapping around her wrist, dragging her away from the door. She screamed, kicking and struggling against the pull, but the force was too strong. It was the house itself, twisting and contorting, bending her will to its own. It wanted her to stay. It needed her to stay. Lena's vision blurred once more, and for a moment she thought she might pass out. The house was suffocating her, pressing in on all sides, pulling her into its endless void. But then something changed. The whispers grew frantic, as if someone was trying to break free from the house's grip. Lena didn't understand it at first, but then she felt it, a sudden surge of energy, a rush of power that she couldn't explain. It filled the room, flooding every inch of space. The house seemed to recoil, its walls vibrating with a sound that was neither human nor natural. And for the first time since she had entered, Lena saw it. A figure, tall, dark, and radiating a sense of power unlike anything she had ever felt, emerged from the shadows. It wasn't a lost soul. It wasn't a part of the house. It was something else. The house seemed to hesitate, its grip loosening, and for a brief moment, Lena thought she had a chance. She could escape. She could be free. But the figure's eyes locked onto hers, and she realized with a chilling certainty that it wasn't there to help her. It was there to take her soul. You thought you could escape. The voice was low, reverberating in her mind, cold and cruel. But now you're mine. Lena's body trembled with exhaustion, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she took frantic, shallow breaths. The air in the room was thick with the presence of the creature that stood before her. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't human. It wasn't even something she could comprehend. It was older, deeper, more ancient than the house itself. It had been waiting for her, waiting for this moment. Her mind raced, trying to grasp at anything that could explain what was happening. She had felt its power, its pull from the very first moment she entered this cursed place. The whispers, the souls, the endless darkness that seemed to consume everything, it was all connected to this creature, this force. And now it had her. The figure was towering over her, its cold, empty eyes fixed on her with an almost sadistic glee. Its form shifted and warped, like a shadow trying to hold onto its shape but constantly losing its form. It wasn't bound by any laws of nature, any rules of reality. It was a being of pure malevolence, an echo of something that had existed long before the house was built, and something that would outlast it when it was gone. You think you can leave? The creature's voice filled the space around her, sharp and piercing, echoing in her ears. It wasn't a voice that came from its mouth. It was in her mind, in her thoughts, in her very soul. It was everywhere. Lena wanted to scream, to push it away, but no sound escaped her lips. The creature's gaze locked onto her, and she felt her entire being freeze. It was as if her very essence was being held captive, drawn into the creature's cold, soulless stare. You're part of the house now, Lena. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. The walls of the room seemed to close in around her, bending and shifting as though they were alive. The house, the entire house, was responding to the creature. It was shifting reality itself, manipulating the space around her to ensure that she could not escape. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to match the tremors of the building. Suddenly, the creature reached forward, its long, gnarled fingers stretching toward her. The space between them seemed to bend and warp as if the laws of time and space themselves were breaking down. Lena stumbled back, but she couldn't escape. She couldn't move. The force of the creature's presence was too powerful, too overwhelming. She felt it seep into her bones, wrapping around her soul like chains, binding her to the house. Her vision blurred, and the world around her began to dissolve, the edges of reality fraying like the threads of a tapestry. She was no longer in the room with the creature. She wasn't even in the house anymore. Where am I? Her mind screamed, but the words were lost in the confusion. The void stretched out before her. There were no walls, no floor, just endless darkness. But through the darkness, shapes began to emerge, twisted and grotesque forms that seemed to flicker and shift like mirages. These were the lost souls, the ones that had been trapped in the house for eternity. She could see their faces twisted in pain and terror, their mouths open in silent screams. And then, as if by some twisted design, Lena felt herself drawn toward them. She didn't move, but she was being pulled, the darkness wrapping around her, pulling her deeper into the heart of the house. She could feel the weight of their sorrow, their regret, pressing down on her. The souls reached out to her, their hands like shadows, their voices a chorus of whispers that filled her ears. "Help us end it. Asterisk, we've been here for so long. Don't let it take you too. Asterisk." Lena tried to scream, to pull away, but her body was no longer her own. She was trapped in this world between the living and the dead, a place where time did not exist, where only darkness ruled. The walls, the floors, the rooms, everything was a part of the house's will, and she was caught in its grip. She could feel it tightening, suffocating her. It wanted her soul. It wanted her to join the ranks of the lost. "Asterisk, please, no. I can't." Asterisk, Lena whispered, her voice a mere echo in the vast emptiness. Her heart was beating erratically, each thud like a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. But the creature's presence grew stronger, surrounding her, filling her with dread. It was watching her from the shadows, waiting, its cold gaze never leaving her. Suddenly, a voice broke through the noise, a familiar voice that Lena recognized as her own. "Asterisk, you can fight this. You don't have to give in. You can leave. Asterisk." The words were soft but strong. She felt a surge of energy, a light in the darkness. It was a momentary shift, a brief crack in the hold that the house had on her. She could feel it, a flicker of hope that grew stronger with every breath she took. Lena gasped, struggling to find her bearings. The lost souls around her began to fade, their figures dissolving into the darkness. The whispers grew distant, but they were still there, lingering like a fog that would never quite dissipate. "You are not one of them, not yet," she heard the voice again. "Asterisk, but you will be if you don't act." Asterisk. The voice wasn't from the creature. It wasn't from the house. It was her own voice. But it wasn't the voice she recognized, the voice that had been trembling in fear for so long. This voice was strong, determined. It was the part of her that refused to give in, the part that still wanted to survive, to break free from the house's grip. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let the house consume her like it had consumed so many before her. But as she took another step forward, she felt the house pull her back. It was trying to drag her into the dark once more. The walls seemed to bend toward her, the shadows growing longer, wrapping around her like chains. The air grew colder. The creature's voice rumbled through the dark. "Asterisk, you cannot escape." Asterisk. But Lena's resolve had hardened. Asterisk, "I will escape." Asterisk. Her hands clenched into fists, and for the first time since she arrived in this cursed house, she felt a surge of power within her. A power that came not from the house, but from her own will. The creature's grip on her mind weakened, just for a moment, but that moment was enough. In the blink of an eye, Lena surged forward, breaking through the grip of the darkness. The house shook, its walls groaning in protest. The floor beneath her feet shifted, trying to throw her off balance, but she fought against it. She ran, her legs moving faster than they ever had, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. As she ran, the house seemed to collapse behind her, the walls falling away, the floor crumbling. The voices of the lost souls faded into the distance. The creature's form flickered, its presence diminishing as Lena pushed forward. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The exit was just ahead, a faint sliver of light shining through the cracks in the walls. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the only thing that mattered now. Lena reached the door, her hand gripping the cold metal handle. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, silent, still. And then she yanked the door open. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled through the door, her heart pounding so violently that it felt as though it would break free from her chest. The air outside the room was cold, damp, and unwelcoming, just like the house itself, but the oppressive, suffocating weight had lifted. For a moment, she thought she might actually be free. But her hope was short-lived. The moment she stepped into the next hallway, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening crash. The sound reverberated through the narrow corridor, like the closing of a coffin. Lena whipped around, her pulse racing. She had no time to waste. But she wasn't in the hallway she remembered. The walls had changed. The long, dimly lit passageway she had passed earlier was gone. Instead, the walls were covered with peeling wallpaper that flickered, almost like it was alive. Faint shadows moved just out of the corner of her vision. It felt as though the house itself was shifting, adapting to her every move, like it was alive, aware, and deliberately toying with her. Is it watching me? The thought gripped her like a vice. Her mind began to crack under the pressure. The house was playing with her, drawing her deeper into its twisted design, bending reality, making her question whether anything was real at all. She stumbled forward, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The hallway seemed endless, stretching out in both directions, as if the house had expanded to swallow her whole. Every step she took only seemed to drag her further into the nightmare. The temperature dropped again, a biting cold that made her teeth chatter and her skin crawl. The air felt thick with the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching her. And then the whispers returned. Lena, you thought you escaped? Asterisk, we never leave. You're part of us now. Asterisk. Her eyes darted frantically, trying to pinpoint the source of the voices. They came from all around her, surrounding her like a storm. The house wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, feeding off her fear, growing stronger with every passing second. You can't run. The voices hummed in perfect unison, as if they had synchronized their torment to drown her. Lena fought the overwhelming panic that surged within her. She wanted to scream, to shout, but the words were trapped in her throat, choked by the terror that clawed at her insides. In the distance, a door appeared at the end of the hallway. It was old and worn, with peeling paint and a rusted doorknob, but it felt different. It felt like the answer. It was the only thing that made sense in the twisted labyrinth of the house. Lena's instincts screamed at her to run toward it, but a part of her hesitated. What if it was another trap? What if the house was luring her into an even darker corner? But she had no choice. There was nothing left. The house was alive. It had been waiting for her, waiting for the right moment to drag her into its heart. And now it was closing in. Lena pushed herself forward, her legs barely responding as she fought to ignore the dark tendrils of fear creeping into her mind. The closer she got to the door, the louder the voices became, their whispers twisting and changing, becoming more frantic, more insistent. Asterisk, you can't leave. Asterisk. Asterisk, you belong to us. Asterisk. The voices weren't just whispers anymore. They were like a constant hum, vibrating in the walls, in the very air, like they were trying to suffocate her from all sides. But she kept moving, drawing closer to the door with each step. The light at the end of the hall grew brighter, as though the door was the only thing that could hold back the darkness. Asterisk, Lena, you're ours. Forever, asterisk. Her hand reached for the doorknob, her fingers trembling as she grasped the cold metal. It turned with an agonizingly slow screech, the sound echoing through the silence like a funeral bell. The door creaked open. Lena stepped inside, and for a brief moment she felt the rush of relief she had been yearning for. But the moment the door slammed shut behind her, she realized that it wasn't the sanctuary she had hoped for. The room she had entered was wrong. It wasn't a room at all, not in the way she expected. The floor was cracked, the ceiling missing entirely. She was standing in what felt like an endless void, surrounded by swirling shadows that seemed to have no origin, no center. There was no escape. And then she saw them. The souls. The lost souls. They hovered in the distance, their faces contorted in agony, their forms flickering in and out of existence. There were hundreds of them, maybe more, each one a twisted reflection of a person who had once lived, now trapped in this hellish purgatory. The house was feeding on them just as it had been feeding on her. But as Lena looked closer, she saw something far worse. Among the souls, she saw herself. A twisted, broken version of herself, standing silently in the crowd. Her eyes were hollow, empty, as if the light had been sucked out of them. Her face was gaunt, pale, as though all the life had been drained from her body. The horror hit her like a physical blow. Asterisk, no. Asterisk, Lena thought, her heart clenching painfully. Asterisk, that can't be me. I won't end up like that, asterisk. The figure of herself reached out, its hand outstretched toward her, the fingers elongated and grotesque. The moment their hands almost touched, Lena felt the floor beneath her feet start to give way, as though the room itself was collapsing. The souls around her screeched in unison, their wails vibrating through her very bones. And that's when the realization hit her. This was the true heart of the house. The place where all the trapped souls merged, feeding into the darkness that had taken root within the walls. This wasn't just about the house. It was a parasite, a force that consumed everything and everyone. It had claimed the living, it had claimed the dead, and it was now coming for her. Lena turned to run, but her legs betrayed her. They were too heavy. Her body was shaking, her vision blurring. She couldn't escape. The house had found her. But just as the walls closed in, just as the air grew thick and suffocating, she heard a voice. A voice that wasn't from the house. A voice she recognized, one she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Lena. It was her mother. Her mother, who had died years ago in an accident, the tragedy that had brought Lena here in the first place. The voice was faint but clear, filled with an overwhelming tenderness. Asterisk, you're stronger than this. You don't belong here. You can fight. You can make it out. Asterisk. Lena's eyes snapped open. She didn't know where the voice was coming from, but she knew it was real. She knew it wasn't the house trying to manipulate her. It was the last thread of hope she had left, and she would hold on to it no matter what. With every ounce of strength left in her, Lena shoved against the suffocating grip of the house, her hands pushing through the darkness. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let the house consume her. And with one final desperate cry, Lena broke through. Lena's heart thudded in her chest, her entire body still trembling with fear and exhaustion as she forced herself forward, through the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. The oppressive weight of the house, the force that had haunted her from the very first moment she had crossed its threshold, was closing in on her once again. But this time she was different. This time she wasn't just a victim. She wasn't going to let the house win. The voice of her mother, faint but clear, still rang in her ears. It wasn't just a memory, a figment of her mind's desperate plea for comfort. It was real. It had to be. The love that had once been a beacon in her life, the one that had sustained her through every hardship, had reached across the void to pull her back from the brink. Her mother had believed in her. She had to believe in herself too. The house had already tried to break her, had already tried to drown her in its shadows. But each time she felt like she was slipping, like she was being consumed by the darkness, the flicker of hope had kept her going. Now she was ready to face whatever awaited her at the heart of the house. The last door, the one that had led her into this terrible, endless void, was now behind her. She had passed through the distorted souls, the flickering shadows, the twisted versions of herself. She had heard their cries, their desperate wails for escape. She had seen her own future mirrored in their tortured forms, but she had refused to become one of them. But the final test awaited her. A cold wind blew, and as Lena looked around, she realized the hallway she was in had started to distort once again. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe, suffocating in its pressure. The walls trembled as if something was moving beneath them, something ancient and monstrous, waiting for her to make her next move. The house itself was alive, its malevolent presence stronger now than ever before. Lena could feel it, the pulling, the crushing weight that tried to steal the breath from her lungs. It was trying to drag her back, to keep her from leaving. The darkness around her seemed to deepen, as if she were being drawn toward the center of the house. But she wouldn't give in. Taking a steadying breath, she moved forward, her feet finding the ground beneath her despite the oppressive air. The hallway stretched out before her, a winding labyrinth of shifting shadows and flickering light. In the distance she could see something, an opening, faint and barely visible. It was a sliver of light in the darkness, and she knew somehow that it was the way out. Every instinct in her screamed to run toward it, but the house wasn't going to let her escape so easily. The temperature plunged, the cold sinking into her skin like daggers. She shivered, but kept moving, determined to break free from its grip. "You're too late, Lena." The voice of the creature, that twisted presence that had haunted her every step, echoed in her mind, mocking her. Asterisk, you belong here with us. You always have. Asterisk. The house seemed to tremble in response, its walls pulsing like the beating heart of something monstrous. And then, in an instant, everything around her changed. The walls of the hallway fell away, and Lena found herself standing in a vast, empty space. The room was completely black, the air thick with darkness, and the floor beneath her felt unstable, shifting. The sliver of light she had seen earlier flickered above her like a distant star, impossibly far away. But before she could take another step toward it, a chilling laugh echoed through the void. It wasn't just the creature now, it was the house itself. The souls, the lost ones, their voices rose in an unholy chorus of despair. Asterisk, no one leaves. Asterisk, asterisk, we are all part of this place. Asterisk. Lena closed her eyes for a brief moment, fighting the wave of terror that tried to flood her senses. She could feel the presence of the house all around her, like invisible fingers brushing against her skin. It was trying to control her, to drag her back into the depths. She couldn't let it win. Asterisk, you're wrong. Asterisk, she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear crawling under her skin. Asterisk, I'm not part of you. I never was. Asterisk. The air shifted, and in the distance, a new figure appeared. It was her. But it wasn't. It was the version of herself she had seen in the darkness, the twisted, broken thing that the house had wanted her to become. It was standing in the center of the void, staring at her with hollow, empty eyes. The creature, the malevolent force controlling the house, was using this to break her, using her own fears against her. It was trying to show her that she was already lost, that this dark future was inevitable. But Lena shook her head. This was not who she was. This was not her future. With every ounce of strength she had left, Lena stepped forward, the darkness swirling around her, but she didn't let it consume her. Each step was harder than the last, but she kept moving. The twisted version of herself stood motionless, its hollow eyes locked onto hers, as though it were waiting for her to join it. Asterisk, you cannot outrun your fate. Asterisk, the creature's voice whispered in the back of her mind. Asterisk, you belong to us now. Asterisk. But Lena kept walking, her body trembling, her mind focused on the one thing that mattered, the light ahead. She wasn't going to let the house have her. She wasn't going to become another lost soul wandering in its endless corridors. She was stronger than it. She was stronger than it all. I'm not you, she said, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. Asterisk, I will never be you. Asterisk. The moment the words left her lips, a sound filled the space, a crack like the breaking of glass. The darkness around her seemed to recoil, as though the very fabric of the house was ripping apart. The light ahead grew brighter, and Lena sprinted toward it, her heart pounding in her chest. The twisted version of herself faded into the shadows, its hollow eyes staring after her, but it no longer had any power. With one final desperate leap, Lena crossed the threshold of light. She felt the weight of the house, its presence, its cold grip, break away from her. And then there was silence. Lena opened her eyes. She was standing in the middle of a familiar, sunlit room, the living room of the house, but not the same. The walls were bright, the air warm, and there was a sense of peace, something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. She was free. For the first time in days, Lena felt like herself again. The darkness had lifted. The house was gone, its twisted grip on her broken. But as she stood there looking around, she noticed something chilling. The front door, the one she had tried so desperately to escape through earlier, was open. And standing in the doorway was a figure, her mother, smiling gently at her. Lena froze. Was it real? Was it just another trick of the house? Her mother's voice was soft, warm, but there was a hint of something else beneath it, an unspoken message, something deeper. Asterisk, you've made it. Now go. What? Live for me? Asterisk. The light outside the door was blinding, pure. It beckoned her forward, promising freedom. And for the first time, Lena realized this was her moment. She wasn't escaping the house. She was walking into a new life. The house was behind her. The darkness was behind her. She took a step forward. And then everything went black.
No.